Welcome to a brutal juvenile detention center, a concrete cage built strictly for convicts under 18. South Korea dumps its most savage, cold-blooded teens right here. Inside these walls, raw violence and daily brutality are just part of the routine. Yet among these monsters sat a kid who had survived a lifelong nightmare of vicious abuse at the hands of his own father. But the moment he finally snapped, fighting back and leaving his tormentor in a permanent coma, a judge slammed him with a 3-year sentence behind bars. Desperate to scrape together cash on the inside, Charlie swallowed his pride and stomached every agonizing humiliation thrown his way. He was even cornered by Jin Sun-ho, a convicted predator who forced him to fish a 500 won coin out of a filthy toilet bowl using nothing but his teeth. Charlie hoarded every single cent like his life depended on it, all to honor a sacred promise. During visiting hours, his childhood friend Daeyeon shook with pure fury the second she spotted the fresh, ugly bruises plastered across his face. She practically begged our boy to grow a backbone, demanding he fight back instead of acting like a human punching bag. Pulling out the meager stash of coins Charlie had been painstakingly saving up for her Daeyeon, slid it back across the table. Years ago, they made a pact the second high school was in the rearview mirror, they would escape their wretched lives and move to Seoul together. She flat out refused his cash, swearing she would hustle and figure the money out on her own. Her only demand was for Charlie to keep his head down and stay breathing. One stupid brawl in here could slap extra time onto his sentence. Our protagonist only had one goal: survive these 3 agonizing years, walk out the gates in one piece, and start fresh in Seoul with Daeyeon. But peace never lasts. Jin Sun-ho, the tyrannical boss ruling over Cell 36, cornered him for another round of torment. The tyrant barked at Charlie to cough up the worn photograph clutched in his fist. When our kid surprisingly clamped his mouth shut and glared back, Jin Sun-ho wound up for a skull-rattling slap. Right as his hands blurred forward, heavy iron doors groaned open. A guard marched in, dragging a fresh face behind him. Gasps echoed from the dark corners of Cell 36. Someone recognized the new blood immediately. It was Ma Gyum. Whispers spread like wildfire. This monster had slaughtered 7 street thugs barehanded. Scoffing at the hype, Jin Sun-ho sneered. Who gives a damn if you caught 7 bodies? Every scumbag bleeding in this joint is a killer. He shoved out his hand, a smug warning for the new meat to bow down and learn his place. Without even blinking, Ma Gyum brushed past the extended hand like the boss was practically invisible, casually claiming a spot on the floor. His ego shattered, Jin Sun-ho erupted. He launched a vicious right hook at the back of the newcomer's head, but Ma Gyum slipped it effortlessly. The reflexes on this guy were terrifyingly fast, a total blur. Watching from the sidelines, Charlie felt a chill run down his spine. This mass murderer operated on yet in a jarring twist, a brutal elbow strike from Jin Sun-ho suddenly crashed right into the face of Ma Gyum. Charlie stood paralyzed in pure shock. As the heavy blows rained down, the notorious killer curled up looking like a pathetic, defenseless punching bag. Still, no matter how savagely the gang stomped on him, he stubbornly refused to play their little lackey or run a single errand. Unintentionally acting as a human meat shield, Ma Gyum soaked up the aggro, giving Charlie a desperate, much-needed break from the daily beat. Cloaked in the dead silence of the night, Charlie whispered over to the bruised newcomer. Is it really that agonizing to just stroke that bastard's ego? Inside this cramped box, the cell boss is God. He pleaded with Ma Gyum to just swallow his pride and play the survival game, piercing the darkness. Ma Gyum coldly shot back. Have you always lived like such a pathetic coward? The vicious comeback hit Charlie like a freight train, completely shutting him up. Those piercing words echoed endlessly in his skull. Our boy, who had spent his entire existence cowering in the shadows, was totally fine embracing that pathetic reality. His only lifeline was clocking out of this hellhole and crashing in Seoul with Daeyeon. She was an orphan, just as lonely as him. Before the sun even peaked the next morning, Daeyeon rushed toward the gates, clutching a warm, home-cooked meal. Knowing how soft-spoken Charlie was, she fretted he was starving behind bars. But out of nowhere, a massive, out-of-control truck barreled straight toward her. In a sickening split second, The carefully packed lunchbox shattered across the bloody asphalt. 24 hours later, a stony-faced guard dragged Charlie out to deliver the gut-wrenching news of the accident outside the gates. Hearing that Dayan was dead, it did not just break his heart. It violently ripped his entire soul to shreds. Slumped in the dark corner of his cell, Charlie stared at the crinkled photo, his eyes completely dead and hollow. Meanwhile, Jin Sun-ho paced the room, spewing venom all afternoon. "You worthless trash. Why the hell did you not scrub the toilet today?" The rest of the vultures also. The inmates jeered from the sidelines. The love of his life had perished in a tragic car crash. Catching wind of this, Jin Sun-ho snatched the photograph, a sickening smirk twisting across his face. The absolute worst part. He started whispering vile, filthy things to the girl in the picture. Our boy just kept his head lowered, eyes glued to the floor. No one could read his mind. Magion, sensing a shift in the air, locked his gaze on Charlie. Meanwhile, Jin Sun-ho just kept spitting out pure trash. He was completely blind to the loaded fist swinging right at him. A split second later, Charlie laid him out cold. The rest of the cell block never saw it coming. Even Magion froze in absolute shock. Just hours earlier on the assembly line, our guy confessed to Magion that his old man was the top enforcer for a notorious mob boss. That monster had basically used him as a punching bag since he was a little kid. But no matter how twisted the guy was, it was still his dad. So Charlie just swallowed the pain and took it. That was until the day the dam finally broke. That piece of garbage had actually dared to lay a hand on Charlie. Back in the present, a humiliated and furious Jin Sun-ho screamed at the crew, "Tear him apart." But our boy, molded by years of brutal beatdowns, had mastered the art of war a long time ago. He used to bite his tongue, desperate to stay under the radar and avoid extra time behind bars. Now every single thug folded like wet paper under his bare. Trembling in panic, Jin Sun-ho pleaded for his life, promising mountains of cash. But the kid did not care about a single dime anymore. His drive to survive this juvenile hellhole, his reason for soaking up all that abuse. For the Charlie standing there right now, all of it had completely vanished. Growing up, his deadbeat dad would constantly bark the exact same order: fall in line and join the syndicate. Charlie endured endless torture from that psycho, his body painted in bruises and scars. Those vicious clashes between father and son had been a daily nightmare. Young Charlie couldn't even stomach meeting that monstrous, terrifying gaze. The man he called a father snarled a chilling warning: "You need to toughen up. Someday you're going to etch this exact crest into your own flesh." In those days, a bewildered Charlie channeled all his boiling rage toward those cursed dragon eyes. Alerted by the sheer chaos, corrections officers smashed through the cell door. Yet inside, an eerie silence had already settled. Wearing a dead hollow stare, Charlie confessed, "I'm the one who did this." Tossed straight into solitary confinement, our shattered hero stared blankly at a blood-soaked photograph, trembling in his grip. His mind drifted back to the very first day of school, a morning where his father had savagely battered him, just like clockwork. Dayoung had been absolutely furious, demanding to know what kind of parent beats their kid on the first day of the semester. But our guy, he had grown totally numb to the abuse ages ago. Seething with rage, she was ready to march right over and confront the monster. But Charlie begged her to never step foot near his home. Defeated Dayoung could only let out a heavy sigh. She promised that the second they graduated high school, she was packing her bags for Seoul. She was completely sick of suffocating inside the orphanage and rotting in this cramped, miserable neighborhood. Her ultimate goal was to conquer a top-tier university. She craved a high-paying corporate gig, a slick imported sports car, and flashy designer bags, all while kicking back in a luxury high-rise overlooking the Han River. Gazing at Charlie, she warmly offered, "When that day finally arrives, you're coming with me." Right then and there, they sealed their pact. An elderly passerby noticed their innocent, heartwarming bond. Smiling, the old man kindly snapped a picture to capture the beautiful moment. Back then, Charlie's heart was overflowing with bright dreams for tomorrow. But now, his entire existence was completely shattered. Guilt clawed at his mind. If he hadn't ended up locked behind bars, his precious girl would never have suffered. Charlie battered his bruised knuckles against the concrete walls over and over again, desperately trying to physically crush the agonizing grief consuming him. Even as thick crimson splattered across the cold floor, he couldn't feel a single ounce of physical pain. The corrections officer, fully aware of Charlie's tragic past, felt a deep pang of pity. But breaking protocol to cut him some slack was completely out of the question. Our boy hadn't touched a crumb of food in over 24 hours. Gently, the guard whispered through the bars. The living still have to find a way to keep breathing. By the following morning, wild rumors were spreading like wildfire across the cell blocks. Our protagonist had single-handedly annihilated an entire room full of hardened convicts. It was crystal clear to the entire block. Jin Sun Ho's brutal defeat meant his reign as cell boss was officially over. The inmate who dared to whisper that fact aloud immediately caught a vicious shove straight to the pavement. He shoved his meal aside because Park Jong-chan, a heavy hitter locked up for a vicious aggravated assault, had suddenly locked his sights on Charlie. Claiming his spot as the alpha of the block, he made it crystal clear to everyone sharing his space: never try to test his absolute dominance. 7 days ticked by before Charlie finally stepped out of the hole, whereas Jin Sun Ho remained completely wrecked in a hospital bed. He only scored that early release because a sympathetic guard felt a shred of pity for the kid's miserable situation. Doing barely 7 days in the dark hit our main guy with a massive reality check. The officers explicitly ordered him to keep his head down and stop stirring up absolute chaos. The second Charlie stepped back into his block, Ma-John braced for catastrophic payback, assuming that crossing the top dog came with a heavy price. He fully expected the rest of the crew to relentlessly tear the kid apart. Instead, the vibe in the room had completely flipped. Everyone was actively bending over backward to get on Charlie's good side. Watching them violently grovel, a massive realization clicked in Ma-Jion's head. Back in high school, your entire worth depends on raw power, rich parents, good looks, and perfect report cards. All those traits carry heavy weight out there. But behind these cold iron bars, the game completely shifts. In this savage cage, raw, terrifying physical power. When yard time rolled around the following morning, our hero specifically pulled Ma-Jion aside to interrogate him about something. Back when Charlie was inches away from turning the alpha into absolute paste, Ma-Jion actually blocked his path, leaving our boy totally baffled as to why. You personally demolished 7 guys with your own hands, so why the hell did you block me from ending that trash? Honestly, when Ma-Jion savagely crushed that crew of 7 thugs, he barely understood his own furious motivations. Right as he opened his mouth to explain, Park Jong-chan stomped over, wearing a fiercely menacing scowl. He aggressively barked at our hero, violently demanding to know how he found the guts to disrespect Jin Sun Ho's absolute rule over the block. He furiously demanded to know if Charlie was gunning for the top spot, but our boy merely shot him an icy glare and told him to back off. Petty prison politics meant absolutely nothing to him. Furious, Park Jong-chan spat a string of harsh curses, completely disgusted by the kid's total lack of respect. Despising arrogant punks who stepped out of line, he declared he would punish Charlie in Jin Sun Ho's name, eager to brutally demonstrate what happens when a mutt bites its master. Right on cue, a passing corrections officer loudly cleared his throat. Yet the man merely shot them a lazy, completely dismissive look. Then he casually turned on his heel and strolled off, blatantly pretending he had not noticed a damn thing. As it happens, the facility's twisted code allowed alphas to spark savage brawls anywhere, loosely masking their pure violence as keeping the peace. Thanks to this deeply rotten loophole, Park Jong-chan possessed total freedom to strike without the slightest hesitation. Still, he completely failed to grasp why Charlie looked so unbelievably dead inside, slumped over like a pathetic stray mutt running on fumes. He smugly figured that beating down a completely broken opponent would end up being a massive, utterly boring snooze. But right at that very second, our hero's dead eyes locked onto the ink etched into Park Jong-chan's fist, triggering a chillingly familiar memory. The design perfectly mirrored the grotesque ink worn by his absolute deadbeat dad. Unaware of this, the bully gleefully wound up to deliver another vicious strike. Charlie instantly exploded into motion, intercepting the blow and violently driving the massive guy straight into the hard chain link barrier. Seizing his attacker's arm, he wrenched the joint with sickening force. Our hero then unleashed an absolutely savage, relentless beatdown. He aggressively rained down strikes like a merciless hurricane, For his entire painful life, the deeply traumatized boy had desperately searched for a target to unload his festering rage. And the absolute only way to release that venom was to completely biting his tongue and bearing the agony had always been his greatest survival skill, right up until that fateful day he caught the horrifying sound of a terrified scream echoing inside his own. That horrific afternoon his monster of a dad had coldly sneered, "Your pathetic little girlfriend barged into my home totally uninvited, and then had the sheer nerve to spew a load of absolute garbage at me. She actually dared to claim that a parent like me deserved to drop dead, so I generously gave her a brutal physical education." Swallowing his trauma was honestly the one thing Charlie did best. But hearing those absolutely vile words caused his entire mental dam to permanently break. Pushed light years beyond his absolute breaking point, our main guy viciously ambushed the monster, relentlessly pummeling his own dad until the man slipped into a permanent vegetative coma. The medical experts bluntly stated the scumbag would never, ever open his eyes again, firmly ruling out everything short of a literal divine intervention. Now, unleashing that exact same blinding fury inside the yard, he instantly captivated the entire prison population. Not a single soul anticipated the quiet kid totally losing his mind. Freshly sprung from the punishment hole, he was already sparking massive, unstoppable chaos. Meanwhile, the bully's tattooed arm was brutally mangled beyond belief. The raw bones were warped into a sickening, deeply twisted knot. Glaring down, our boy's eyes radiated such a terrifying sub-zero. He aggressively burned holes straight through that repulsive ink. High above the chaotic yard, a highly important spectator was silently documenting the entire bloody spectacle. The facility's top boss, Warden Kwon Chung-seok, flashed a highly sinister smirk, outwardly relieved the kid survived the brawl, yet feeling intensely fascinated by this explosive new predator. Whispers rippled through the yard. Everyone was dying to know exactly who this newly discharged kid was hunting down. Once yard time wrapped up, the inmates filed back into their cages. Sitting quietly in the corner, Ma Yong frantically scribbled away in his battered journal. Because the more he chewed on the day's events, the more it hit him he was sharing a tiny cell with an absolute monster of a human being. Out of nowhere, a guard barked Charlie's name. Only this time it wasn't for an interrogation. He actually had a visitor. Our boy racked his brain, completely baffled. Who the hell would come looking for him? His mom had bailed on him when he was just a toddler, and the rest of his deadbeat relatives had ghosted him years ago. While he was still trying to piece the puzzle together, the heavy oak doors swung open. He wasn't in the visitor room. He was standing dead center in the warden's private office. A sickeningly familiar silhouette flashed a twisted grin. Cha Gangryong was absolutely thrilled by the savage bloodlust his son had just unleashed out in the yard. Charlie froze, his blood running cold. His absolute scumbag of a father had actually clawed his way out of a coma. Hell, even Gangryong himself could hardly believe he was. After clawing his way up the bloody ranks to become a cartel lieutenant, the man had actually been beaten to a bloody pulp by his own flesh and blood. But the second his eyes fluttered open in that sterile hospital bed, and the memories flooded back, Gangryong didn't feel a single drop of anger. Instead, a violently thrilling rush of pure adrenaline surged through his veins, because that was the ruthless killer his boy was destined to become, a true heir to the Cha bloodline. And as a devoted father, he was willing to cross any line to push his son over the edge, which meant he had no choice but to slaughter that innocent girl. The horrifying truth hit like a freight train. It was Gangryong who had mercilessly gunned the engine and crushed Dayan under his tires. As she lay bleeding out on the cold asphalt, the last thing she saw looming over her was a face far more demonic than the devil himself. For years, this monster truly believed Charlie was just a pathetic, spineless coward who only knew how to take a beating. But the moment the kid finally snapped and unleashed hell, he saw a gold mine of raw potential. And that sweet girl, she was simply the sacrificial key needed to ignite that violent spark. In his twisted mind, our boy was straying way too far from his dark destiny. So Gangryong butchered the girl, just to forcefully drag him back into the shadows. It was all a sick game to trigger Charlie's ultimate awakening. The warden practically jumped out of his skin as Charlie suddenly exploded, launching a devastating right hook and tearing into Gangryong with blinding speed. The kid finally knew exactly what needed to be done. But a split second later, a massive volley of taser darts slammed directly into his chest. 50,000 volts of raw electricity violently hijacked his nervous system. A swarm of heavily armed guards rushed in, pinning the violently twitching teenager firmly against the floor. Gang Ryong just stared down at the squirming boy, a dark smirk creeping onto his face. You want payback? You want to tear your own flesh and blood apart with your bare hands? Then I'll lay out the red carpet for you. Our syndicate has plenty of fresh blood rotting inside these very walls. Sure, they're just street punks flashing wet ink right now, but a handful of them are destined to be the future warlords of our empire. Prove to me you're the ultimate predator in this cage. I want you to rip control of this entire hellhole right out of their hands. The sick plan was simple. If Charlie could violently earn the cartel's absolute loyalty and claw his way to the top, one day he'd be ruthless enough to snatch Gang Ryong's throne and finally slaughter him in cold blood. To ultimately inherit the terrifying empire of the Heavenly Dragon Syndicate, every dark ambition Gang Ryong couldn't quite grasp in his blood-soaked lifetime, he would forcefully mold his son into achieving. His twisted legacy would finally be perfected through Charlie's rage. Beaming with toxic pride, the mob boss glanced down at the kid, who was still gasping on the carpet. Tossing a careless wave, he left the dirty work to the warden and walked out. But then the absolute unthinkable happened. Letting out a guttural roar, our boy violently yanked the barbed tasers right out of his flesh. Screw playing along with this sick bastard's twisted little script. Gang Ryong was going to meet his maker today. Yet before he could even blink, a massive shadow completely engulfed him, locking his arms in a vice grip. Bowing deeply, the stranger murmured an apology, begging forgiveness for disrespecting the young master. But as the boss's loyal dog, shielding him was his only purpose in life. But what seriously rattled this seasoned enforcer was the sheer, terrifying force pushing back. As the strike team captain of the Heavenly Dragon, he was actually struggling to hold his ground against a furious teenager using nothing but the sheer explosive power of his legs. Pausing at the door, Gang Ryong sneered at his pathetic kid, barking at him to wake the hell up. Against a monster like the captain, our boy couldn't even land a scratch. Blind rage is just gonna get you killed, Gang Ryong coldly lectured, vanishing down the hall. The only way you're taking me down is by hijacking this entire hellhole fueled by absolute unhinged rage. Ju Young shot daggers at the man, but catching that venomous stare, Cha Gang Ryong merely smirked. He was already itching for the next showdown with his own flesh and blood. Over in the woodshop, Magyom was wrapping up his daily grind when a shadow loomed over his shoulder. With a mockingly clumsy flick of the wrist, the guy dropped his toolbox. A single rusted spike tumbled right down to Magyom's boots. Magyom's blood instantly ran cold. Standing right there, flashing a sickeningly bright grin, was Yoon Gun Min, doing time for armed robbery and arson. It was their first face-to-face since middle school graduation. And trust me, Magyom hadn't forgotten a single detail about this psychotic piece of trash. Honestly, Gun Min had been dying to pick his old classmate's brain. The headlines claimed that Magyom had butchered 7 different victims. Calling his bluff, the bully leaned in. Did you actually pull that off? He just couldn't buy it, knowing the kid had been a spineless goody two-shoes since they were in diapers. Right on cue, a guard barked at them to shut their mouths and get back on the clock. Snapping back to reality, Magyom winced. He had been so brutally rattled by the ambush that he had actually sliced his own palm. The second the iron doors slammed shut on his cell, his mind started racing, plotting his next moves. His entire existence boiled down to one single mission: slaughtering his old man. Yet he was completely flying blind. Nearby the block was whining about the daily slop groaning that they would kill for just one greasy slice of pizza. Catching that chatter, a spark lit up in Ju Young's eyes. He lazily waved a guard over, demanding, "Fetch me a pie." That wildly arrogant stunt earned him an instant explosive chewing out from the uniform. But flash forward 20 minutes, the entire block was inhaling hot, melted cheese, showering the rich kid with praise. Sitting in the shadows, Magyom knew his gut was dead right. From the warden at the top down to the lowest grunt, they were all treating this brat with kid gloves, simply because of his tyrant father. Our VIP was just pushing the envelope to see exactly who owned this fortress. Devouring the feast, the convicts started swapping wild theories about the insane power Mr. Cha Gang-ryong actually wielded. Meanwhile, Ma-gyom just brooded silently in the darkest corner, his racing thoughts an absolute mystery to the room. Fast forward to the next morning's sweatshop duties. Suddenly, Gun-min had another convenient little accident. A pre-sharpened spike jammed right into Ma-gyom's ribs, whipping around a murderous shadow across the quiet kid's face. "What the hell is your problem?" he hissed. A massive meathead standing nearby immediately sneered. "Hey, this doesn't match the crazy hype you were feeding us." See, Gun-min had been running his mouth all morning, bragging that this legendary mass murderer used to be his personal punching bag. The giant had been holding his breath for fireworks. But watching this pathetic display unfold, he realized the arsonist's tough guy act was nothing but hot air. Flashing a twisted, sick smile, the bully doubled down. "I wasn't joking around. This guy and I share a ton of precious history." He leaned, "Slipping your mind. Then let me jog your memory the hard way." He grabbed Ma-gyom by the scalp and brutally slammed his flashback to those middle school hell days. The frail kid was shoved into a rusted locker in a pitch-black storage room. But this wasn't an ordinary metal box. The walls were bristling with jagged iron spikes pointing straight inward. He pleaded with his tormentor to open the door, but the psycho just laughed. "The fun is just getting started, buddy." He even threatened to take a sledgehammer to the outside, driving the metal points deeper into the crying boy's flesh. Snapping back to the present, Gun-min crushed the boy's skull against the wood. "Is it coming back to you now?" The rest of the shop crowded in like vultures, howling with laughter. Honestly, after seeing the broadcast about him slaughtering 7 innocents, even his childhood bully refused to believe the hype. Gripping a steel spike, he drove his fist down toward the kid's eye. But in a split-second blur, the attacker's wrist was snatched out of the air by a vice-like grip completely locked in place. Ma-gyom's voice dropped to an icy, dead monotone. "You want to see exactly how I—" Just as the tension peaked, the guard bellowed from across the floor. "Hey, quit messing around." Zip those lips. Forced to back off, the thug shot his target, one last venomous glare over his shoulder. In his twisted mind, he was utterly convinced this supposed killer was still the exact same pathetic punching bag from back in the day. Later that night, Charlie actually stepped up to show Ma-gyom some gratitude. Think about it, if Ma-gyom hadn't ripped him away from murdering that guy, Charlie would be rotting behind these bars for another 10 years. And if that happened, his shot at slaughtering his own flesh and blood, his twisted father, would vanish entirely. So yeah, Charlie swore he would settle the score. Deep into the graveyard shift, the floor guard suddenly bolted, muttering some lame excuse about an emergency. He dumped the workshop cleaning duties right onto Ma-gyom's lap. Staring blankly at a moth perched on the workbench, Ma-gyom found himself sucked right back into the dark abyss of his childhood memories. Yoon Gon-min, the very first kid he ever called a friend. But Gon-min's bizarre obsession with hoarding creepy crawlies branded him as the ultimate freak show at school. The other kids constantly roasted him, sneering, "What is your damage, psycho? You catching those bugs for a snack?" Whenever the bullying flared up, Ma-gyom, stepping up as the class president, would dive into the crossfire and shut that garbage down. But honestly, neither of them could pinpoint the exact moment their bond started to crack, fading into thin air without them even realizing. By sophomore year, getting tossed into different homerooms basically hammered the final nail in the coffin of their friendship. Then, one random afternoon, Ma-gyom caught whispers echoing down the hallway. That pathetic loser, Gyeon-min. The class bullies are torturing him again. They just dragged his skinny butt into the storage closet a second ago. Panic spiked in his chest. Ma-gyom sprinted toward the storage room like a bat out of hell to rescue his old friend. But out of nowhere, Gyeon-min materialized right behind him, violently shoving Ma-gyom into a pitch-black locker. The sick truth. Gyeon-min was absolutely desperate to join the exact same gang of thugs who had been making his life a living nightmare. Their one twisted initiation rule. He had to hand over his absolute most prized specimen. And naturally, whenever Gyeon-min trapped the live bug, he mercilessly pinned it down for his collection. Snapping back to reality, Gyeonmin strolled into the dim carpentry shop. He snatched up the moth, his voice dripping with venom. People fawn over butterflies, but they absolutely despise moths, just like me back in the day. And guess what? This is all your fault. Ma Gyum's jaw practically hit the floor. It hit him Gyeonmin had spent years convincing himself that Ma Gyum's kindness was totally fake, a cheap mask, while secretly icing him out behind his back, and ultimately stabbing him in the back. To the rest of the world, Ma Gyum was the golden boy, the beloved butterfly, while Gyeonmin was nothing more than a repulsive dirt-eating moth. Once that toxic idea took root, every single morning felt like drowning in a suffocating psychological breakdown. Hearing this delusional garbage, Ma Gyum started shaking with pure, unfiltered rage. "You are out of your damn mind," he roared. Ma Gyum spat back that Gyeonmin's twisted games were the exact reason he ended up slaughtering 7 people. But before he could even throw a punch, a pack of massive inmates swarmed the room, violently tackling Ma Gyum to the concrete. That scumbag Gyeonmin had clearly bought off the guard. The main event was just kicking off. He was about to turn Ma Gyum into his personal trophy all over again. Only this time the psycho had rigged a massive locker to the brim with a swarming sea of insects. He was absolutely itching to watch Ma Gyum, a guy crippled by a severe bug phobia, totally lose his mind as thousands of creepy crawlies swarmed every inch of his skin. But Ma Gyum just clamped his jaw shut, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a single whimper. One of the heavyweight thugs glanced at Gyeonmin, hesitating. "Yo, are we seriously? The dude is literally in here for multiple homicides." But Gyeonmin did not give a single flying flip. Actually, the big guy kinda dug watching Gyeonmin completely embrace his inner psychopath. Stepping up to the plate, Gyeonmin was ready to treat his audience to the sweet, hysterical melody of Ma Gyum screaming for his life. "Hold up," a cold voice echoed. Charlie suddenly stepped from the shadows, tilting his head. "What kind of scream were you hoping for exactly? Because I am personally dying to hear what your scream sounds like." One of the meatheads instantly lunged at Charlie, but honestly, it was pathetic. Charlie swatted him away with a single, brutal right hook, sending the giant crashing straight into the locker holding Ma Gyum. Locking eyes with Ma Gyum, Charlie smirked. "Pay attention. That debt I owe you, we are wiping the slate clean tonight." See, dragging a prisoner to the workshop long after lights out reeked of a setup from the get-go. That is exactly why Charlie had cornered the night guard earlier, physically strong-arming the guy into popping his cell door wide open. And boom. That is exactly how our absolute menace of a protagonist crashed this little workshop party. Gyeonmin flashed a sickeningly sweet smile, mocking Ma Gyum for scoring such a fiercely loyal guard dog. But the hulking inmate suddenly broke into a cold sweat. He knew exactly who Charlie was, the ruthless brawler who had been tearing this prison apart lately. Absolutely everywhere. The massive dude respected loyalty, so he looked down at our guy and offered a truce. "Want to team up?" In a flash, Charlie slammed him into the concrete, flipping the giant like a rag doll. Our lead had zero interest in befriending garbage like that. He locked eyes with the blonde kid and growled, "Why the hell are you putting Ma Gyum through this?" Jung Ho Min snapped back, "Are you screwing with me? That backstabber dragged me through absolute hell." To my face, he acted like my lifelong best friend, faking all that loyalty and care. But in the shadows, he was a venomous snake, just waiting to sink his fangs into my throat. So if you are going to run with Ma Gyum, you had better sleep with one eye open. Suddenly, the hulking prisoner surged upward, locking Charlie in a brutal bear hug. The guy's raw power was freakish, yet our lead violently wrenched himself loose, snapping the giant's fingers and shattering the bones like twigs. But in that exact split second, Jung Ho Min charged forward, thrusting a jagged blade straight at Charlie. The blonde punk had completely snapped, acting like a certified psychopath. Even the massive brute was impressed by that sheer savagery. But right then, Ma Gyum slipped up behind the giant, locking a vicious chokehold around his throat. Jung Ho Min was totally blindsided. It turned out that Ma Gyum had actually busted out of the storage locker. Charlie had already shattered the padlock with a single brutal kick. Now running free, Ma Gyum launched a that was way too close for comfort. Meanwhile, Ma Guillaume kept tightening his death grip on the brute's neck. Crimson dripped down the heavy iron chain, completely coating his knuckles. The hulking brute finally reached his limit and blacked out on the spot. Ma Guillaume instantly locked eyes with Jung Ho Min. His terrifying aura was so heavy that the blonde kid's knees buckled, dropping him to the cold floor. Trembling at Ma Guillaume's feet, he desperately pleaded for mercy. "I just lost my mind for a second. You know me. I am just a worthless psycho. Please just chalk it up to one of my episodes and let me walk away." But Ma Guillaume wasn't buying that pathetic excuse for a second. His entire life had been trashed by this guy's paranoid, selfish delusions. That was the cold, hard truth. Initially, Ma Guillaume figured that since he already had 7 bodies to his name, burying Jung Ho Min wouldn't change a damn thing. Yet staring down at the pathetic mess before him, his burning hatred somehow faded. Deep down, he used to genuinely view Jung Ho Min as a brother. Hearing those words, the blonde kid froze. Internally, though, his twisted mind was screaming, "What the hell is this moron about?" Jung Ho Min silently vowed that the moment he got a chance, he would carve Ma Guillaume up into a bloody specimen. But Charlie wasn't about to show any mercy. He flatlined the blonde kid, with one ruthless punch knocking him out cold. Consider that payback for the deep knife wound the psych. Ma Guillaume was just opening his mouth to thank Charlie when a shadowy figure stepped up, looming over Jung Ho Min's body. The alpha of Cell 23 glared down, demanding with ice in his voice. "Jung Ho Min, who the hell gave you permission to leave the cell?" Even though the kid was already dead to the world. The boss of Cell 23 unleashed a brutal right hook straight into his jaw. His crime: failing to squash a cockroach fast enough. That tiny mistake had sent the boss of Cell 23 into an absolute frenzy. Watching this, Charlie and Ma Guillaume felt ice water shoot through their veins. Jung Ho Min took such a savage beating that his unconscious body started twitching violently on the... During the assault, the boss of Cell 23 got his face totally caked in filth. Without blinking, he snatched the collar of Charlie's shirt and scrubbed his dirty face. He glared up with a manic grin and growled, "Well, am I all clean now?" Charlie didn't even flinch. He just casually replied, "Nope, your face is still complete." The alpha of Cell 23 instantly lost his mind, lunging directly at our hero with murderous intent. But before he could land a hit, a prison guard stormed into the block, screaming at them to back off. "If your shift is done, get your asses back to your cells, right now." The boss of Cell 23 locked his cold gaze on Charlie. He burned Charlie's inmate number, 7199, directly into his brain. The following day, out in the rec yard, the crew from Cell 36, where our protagonist was housed, swarmed around him like flies. Gunnaman had figured out one crucial detail. Ever since Charlie snapped a guy's wrist out in the open yard, he had radiated an aura of pure, untouchable terror. Sticking close to him meant absolute immunity from any yard beef. But our hero couldn't care less about playing bodyguard. He had a single mission: hunt down the Crimson Fire Dragon, a vibrant blue serpent wrapped in blood-red lotus flowers. Charlie needed to track down the scumbags, branded with that exact ink, since every last one of them took orders from that cursed syndicate. The only problem: this hellhole was swarming with way too many convicts. Sensing an opening, Gunnaman eagerly stepped up, boasting about his massive underground intel network and offering to dig up whatever Charlie needed. Without missing a beat, our protagonist stated coldly, "I'm hunting down some punks with specific tattoos." Later that evening, the warden fired up the projector, forcing the block to watch another cheesy educational flick about school bullying. Charlie scoffed, his voice dripping with ice. "Trash like that belongs in a cage until the day they die." But Gunnaman immediately chimed in, "Hey now, not everybody locked up in here is pure evil, you know." Way back in the day, my old block had this absolute legend of a street food spot. Their spicy rice cakes were completely out of this world. I practically lived at that joint. But then some arrogant politician's kid strutted in, throwing his daddy's weight around. This unhinged brat completely lost his mind, throwing a massive tantrum, all because the seasoning wasn't exactly to his fancy. He trashed the entire stall to pieces. That was my cue. Stepping right into the chaos, the self-proclaimed Captain Rice Cake stood his ground. I completely wrecked that punk and cemented my legacy as the culinary crusader who saved the neighborhood snack shack. But well, thanks to that rich psycho crying to his daddy, I wound up rotting in a cell. A nearby convict scoffed, rolling his eyes. Here we go with the fairy tales again. The whole block knew Gunnaman's reputation as the undisputed king of tall tales. Rumor had it a cell boss had recently beaten him to an absolute pulp, just for running his mouth, which was exactly why he got dumped into a new block. But staring right at him, Charlie realized Gunnaman's eyes didn't hold a single trace of deception. Think of it like nature aphids secrete sweet nectar for ants, and in return, the ants provide muscle to protect them. That was the exact dynamic brewing between Gunnaman and these thugs. Surviving this long, the chatterbox had finally cracked the prison's code. Charlie, the undisputed apex predator, ruling cell 36, was actually tolerating his endless yapping. Gunnaman smirked to himself. If I can cement my spot as Charlie's right-hand man, I'll breeze through the rest of this sentence on easy mode. Grinning like an absolute idiot, he hacked away at the dirt, chipping away at his daily labor. But a sudden flick of his shovel sent a rogue clod of mud flying smacking squarely into the leader of the cell. 23. Gunnaman's blood instantly ran cold. A tidal wave of pure trauma slammed into his brain. Because standing right there was his nightmarish former boss, a downright psychotic, clean freak. Panic gripped Gunnaman's throat. Why the hell was this demon suddenly looming over him? The cell 23. Tyrant sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Hey, is that face of yours spot? Trembling Gunnaman squeaked out, super clean boss. Miraculously, the tyrant backed off, letting it slide for the moment. But the toxic bug spray was coming either way. The second that corrosive liquid blasted his face, Gunnaman burst into tears immediately from the blinding sting. Shrieking in absolute agony, he frantically scrubbed filthy dirt right into his eyes. Looming over the miserable wretch, the Cell 23 boss proposed a twisted little deal. He prided himself on absolute purity. But that filthy scumbag number 7199 had actually dared to call him repulsive. So the neat freak boss demanded Gunnaman's help to thoroughly sterilize the threat. And right there, blazing across his bare skin, was the unmistakable ink of a blue serpent tangled in crimson lotuses. Meanwhile, back in his own block, Charlie effortlessly banged out his 100th two-finger push-up. His mind kept racing furiously, turning over the same burning question. Where the hell was the bastard sporting that dragon tattoo hiding? Suddenly, Gunnaman burst in loudly, geeking out over the flawless angle of Charlie's erector spinae and thoracic spine. Treating the fighter like a sculpted masterpiece, he eagerly shoved a glass of weird tree tomato juice into Charlie's hands, swearing it was the ultimate post-workout shake. Staring deadpan at the incredibly suspicious liquid, Charlie raised an eyebrow and asked, "Where exactly did you score the stuff you spiked the water with?" Sweat beaded on Gunnaman's forehead as he stammered out his defense, insisting he paid for it using the commissary funds, obviously. Still serving up a random glass of juice out of nowhere reeked of a setup. The rest of the cell block started jeering. "Make Gunnaman take the first sip," they chanted. Goo's stomach dropped into his shoes, terrified his cover was blown. But without missing a beat, Charlie grabbed the cup and chugged the whole thing down. Tomorrow was scheduled for heavy-duty scrub down. He ordered the whole crew to get their gear ready ahead of time. Gunnaman's jaw practically hit the floor. He never dreamed the kid would knock it back without a second thought. Truth be told, that initial cup was totally harmless. He was just throwing out some bait to gauge Charlie's reaction. Later that night, our boy sat alone, obsessively sketching out the twisted scales of the Crimson Fire Dragon. Gunnaman couldn't hold his tongue any longer. "Why the hell did you believe me?" he blurted out. Considering Goo's sketchy track record, trusting him was basically a rookie mistake. Charlie didn't even look up as he muttered, "Con artists aren't stupid. A crafty rat like you wouldn't spin a web of lies just to poke the bear for kicks." The following morning brought chaos. The Ministry of Justice was rolling in for an inspection, forcing the inmates to scrub the showers from top to bottom. Gunnaman puffed out his chest and marched right up to the boss of Cell 23. "I'm out," he spat. You didn't need a crystal ball to see the fallout. The cell block kingpin wasn't about to let inmate 7199 walk away breathing. Fine. If Gu wouldn't do it, the boss decided he'd drag the coward along and personally exterminate Charlie himself. Right on cue, our protagonist stepped out of the shadows. "What's the little secret meeting in the latrine about?" he asked, his voice dripping with ice. "Back off, you filthy piece of trash. You're contaminating the air," the boss shrieked. Slammed violently against the porcelain urinals, Gu smiled a bloody grin. His gamble had paid off. Just moments prior, he had spilled his guts to Charlie. "Some psycho held a blade to my neck, ordered me to poison your drink with bug spray. But a real man like me would rather die than stab a buddy in the back," he had dramatically proclaimed. "I'll take a beating before I play their sick game." But the real golden ticket was the clue Gu dropped next. That elusive crimson fire dragon ink Charlie had been hunting like a ghost. It was burned right onto the skin of the guy pulling Gu's strings. Back in the present washroom standoff, Charlie aggressively wiped his grimy hands all over the pristine uniform of the Cell 23 leader. That single smear of dirt sparked a nuclear meltdown. The germaphobe snapped, swearing he would butcher the kid alive. He screamed that he'd leave Charlie's corpse to... Charlie didn't even blink, delivering a chillingly deadpan response. "Shut your damn mouth, you're giving me a headache." With a brutal twist, he body-slammed the cell boss straight into the concrete tiles. Knowing this scumbag rocked that cursed tattoo gave Charlie the green light to shatter every bone in his body. Zero regrets. This wasn't just some random thug. The boss of 23 used to be a heavily hyped prodigy in the underground fight circuit. His terrifying bread and butter was a brutal leg lock wrapping his heavy thighs around victims and slowly crushing the life out of them. He'd lock them down so tight, squeezing their windpipes until they physically couldn't even tap out. But his career ended the night a desperate rival spat a mouthful of blood directly into his face. He retired the move on the spot. It was poetically pathetic. A brawler notorious for fighting dirty had cultivated the absolute worst phobia a cage fighter could possess, a crippling fear of germs. Pinning him down, Charlie launched a ruthless interrogation, demanding names tied to the Celestial Dragon Syndicate. But the grimy, puddle-ridden floor was his worst nightmare. "Get off me. My skin is crawling. I'm going to get infected," the boss wailed in pure panic. Charlie let out a dark chuckle. "I'm about to break your neck and you're crying over a few microbes." Out of patience, our boy plunged his bare hand straight into the stagnant water of a clogged urinal, ready to deliver some extreme psychological torture. Dripping with foul, yellow-tainted sludge, he aimed to shove that filthy fist right down the screaming leader's throat. But in a split-second blur of motion, Charlie's balance was ripped away, sending him stumbling hard. Driven by absolute terror, the germaphobe snapped his wrist back and flipped the script, pinning Charlie down in a desperate reversal. The disgraced fighter locked his massive legs around the kid's torso, clamping down like a steel vise. He was trying to rupture our protagonist's organs through sheer pressure. Watching from the sidelines, Gu stood frozen, debating if he should jump into the meat grinder. But Gu suddenly froze. The atmosphere felt completely off. Growing up, Charlie had never known the warmth of a father's embrace, not even once. The only time his old man ever wrapped his arms around him was during brutal sparring sessions, delivering a suffocating, bone-crushing grip that mirrored this exact hold. That memory clawed at Charlie's mind, a sickening nightmare he desperately wanted to bury. But exactly because of that deep-rooted trauma, brutal ground-and-pound combat felt as natural to him as breathing. The spine of the Cell 23. Boss started popping like bubble wrap. A twisted curiosity sparked inside our protagonist's mind. What would give out first? His own burning insides, or this scumbag's spinal cord? A split second later, a sickening crunch echoed from the mangled body of the Cell 23 boss. The agonizing torment had him slapping the floor, begging Charlie for mercy. He was frantically tapping out, pleading to surrender. But thanks to his absolute deadbeat of a father, our boy had never been taught the concept of yielding. Pure, unadulterated dread washed over the boss's bruised face. Out in the yard, the rest of the inmates were still scrubbing the grounds, while the restrained cell boss now had a plastic funnel shoved straight into his mouth. He was playing tough, biting his tongue about anything related to the Heavenly Dragon Syndicate. This seriously pissed Charlie off. He didn't want to resort to this filthy method either. But for a hardcore germaphobe, psychological torture using raw filth was his absolute most devastating weapon right now. The most ruthless criminal empire in all of Korea went by one name: the Heavenly Dragon Syndicate. They branded their flesh with a fierce crimson fire dragon, a sprawling blue serpent tangled in blood-red blossoms. The blue scales stood for absolute dominance and raw power, while the crimson petals represented unyielding life and immortality. This underground empire systematically bred an army of lethal, underage recruits. They threw these kids into a brutal, meat-grinder death game, slaughtering the weak without a second thought. Eventually, the surviving seeds were meant to blossom into the vicious, blood-red flowers of the Heavenly Dragon. Being nothing more than a bottom-feeding grunt, the Cell 23 boss only had access to this surface-level intel. Ultimately, his mind snapped under Charlie's relentless torture, forcing him to spill every single detail he knew. It suddenly clicked in Charlie's head the hellish, bone-breaking training his scumbag old man forced upon. Convinced he was destined to rise above the rest, the delusional boss, actually, assumed our hero was only asking about the syndicate because he was begging for a spot in their ranks. Smirking with absolute unearned confidence, he sneered, "If you play your cards right from here on out, I just might be generous enough to put in a good word for you with the Heavenly Dragon." Charlie's response: a bone-chilling, mocking chuckle. His fingers snapped around the thug's throat, crushing his windpipe with brutal force. The punk had already spilled his guts, but his ugly mug was seriously pissing Charlie off, earning him one last savage beatdown. With the trash finally taken out, our guy resumed his massive prison sweep alongside his crew. His ultimate goal was to slaughter every last piece of Heavenly Dragon scum locked inside these walls. The catch: half the yard was covered in ink, making it a massive headache to pinpoint his exact targets. That's when Gu Na-min dropped a crucial question. Don't these Heavenly Dragon freaks share some kind of pattern? A light bulb went off in Charlie's head. The two scumbags he had just crushed shared one vital detail. They were both block captains, meaning all he had to do was hunt down the remaining block bosses. But Gu Na-min waved off the idea of a tedious manhunt. Why? Because, in exactly 1 week, a massive captain's summit was going down, bringing all the heavy hitters under one roof. This seasonal gathering was pitched as a brotherhood retreat. In truth, it was a filthy black market hub where every shady deal behind bars was finalized. Inmates literally dubbed it the Underworld Convention. Gu Na-min threw out a heavy warning, urging Charlie to watch his back. The monsters attending this little party are the most vicious predators in the nation. Anyone ruthless enough to secure a seat at that table was a certified walking nightmare, second only to the country's top-tier mafia dons. Fast forward 7 days. The summit of scumbags kicked off exactly as planned. The cell block bosses were already buzzing. Word on the inside was that Park Jong-chang and that neat freak had just been crushed by some new kid named Charlie. That sheer level of disrespect really got under their skin. Right on cue, the heavy door groaned open. Without missing a beat, our guy grabbed the shovel leaning against the entrance and snapped it right in half. In a flash, he launched himself right at the cell boss, sporting that sick fire dragon ink. Cha Ju-young was dead set on stomping out every single Heavenly Dragon before they even had a chance to grow. The rest of the bosses stared totally baffled as Ju-young taunted the Heavenly Dragon leader, daring him, "Come get some." But Do-hwan iced him out. Sure, the ward bosses could definitely throw hands to keep everyone in line, but they needed a solid excuse first. Just look at those 3 top dogs. Our boy, recently wrecked. They had to clash first before any real beatdown happened. Do-hwan Park called that crucial step a justification, and right then, he didn't have a single reason to waste his energy brawling with Ju-young. If our MC actually pushed his luck and wrecked the block's peace, the other shot callers would absolutely tear him apart. Honestly, Ju-young's crazy stunt was just a quick test to prove his own theory. If anybody went rogue, no matter their rank, they instantly painted a massive target on their back for the rest of the bosses. Do-hwan caught on to that instantly. He knew Ju-young wasn't actually planning to throw down. He could practically taste our boy's pure hatred for the Heavenly Dragon crew. But to Do-hwan acting that cocky was just straight up pathetic. The second the moderator stepped in, the cell leader's sit-down officially kicked off. In this massive gathering, besides the three guys, Ju Young had already crushed every other big shot showed up, and our protagonist had officially taken over as the new king of Cell 36. He scanned the room, counting roughly 15 ward bosses who showed up today. Aside from Do Hwan, he still couldn't spot who else was hiding a Heavenly Dragon tattoo. Any spot inside this joint where the bosses hustled for cash was universally known as a shop. A fat cut of those earnings always went straight into the warden's pocket. The moderator called out someone for missing their payment this season. Turns out it was Do Hwan's underground casino. Do Hwan just flashed a slick smile, brushing it off as a simple mistake. But out of nowhere, a white-haired boss dropped a wild rumor that had been blowing up lately, claiming that this so-called honest and fair gambling den, built for high rollers, was totally rigging its games. The entire room went dead silent. Smirking, Do Hwan shot back, "You all know exactly what goes down when someone gets caught cheating at the tables. If my joint is actually rigged, you guys can do whatever the hell you want with me." Once the moderator wrapped up the rest of the agenda, the summit finally adjourned. Do Hwan's gambling ring was hidden right inside the auto repair workshop. The dealer running the floor, Ji-Eun Ho, looked at the new guy and asked, "First time hitting the tables? Then you should definitely start with the Ju Young knew dragging this out was a total waste of time. Since Park made it clear he needed a solid excuse before throwing down our protagonist, was going to carve out that exact justification himself. He obliterated the dice board with a single brutal punch, instantly exposing the hidden magnet buried inside. Growling, Ju Young spat, "You guys are running a total scam." The outside world honestly thought this heavily guarded juvie was some kind of strict rehab center meant to turn young punks into model citizens. But ever since Warden Kwon Chang-suk, the 26th guy to run this place, took power, it quickly morphed into an absolute criminal hellhole. The whole penitentiary was basically fueled by these underground shops, creating a massively profitable operation. As long as the block bosses kicked up a fat slice of their cash, to the warden, they scored crazy privileges that regular prisoners couldn't even fantasize about. Out of all the rackets, the casino was basically a trap designed to drive guys completely insane with gambling fever. Even after blowing their last token, these desperate inmates kept dreaming about winning it, all back on one lucky roll. When they hit rock bottom, Do Hwan swooped in like a savior. If they signed an IOU, they'd get handed a massive stack of chips. And these gambling-crazed punks would literally cross any line just to stay in the game. The second Ju Young called out the rigged magnet in the dice tray, the whole casino flipped into absolute chaos. But Yoon-ho just scoffed. "That's no magnet, man. It's just a metal axis to keep the weight balanced." Right after dropping that excuse, the dealer casually whipped out his own magnet to prove it. Ju Young hovered the sphere right next to the device, waiting for a spark. Nothing. The ball just hit the floor with a dull, lifeless thud. Desperate to prove the magnet wasn't a fake, Young-ho yanked out a handful of scrap iron. The surrounding inmates, they just rolled their eyes, letting out a chorus of mocking sneers. "What the hell kind of fit is inmate 7199 throwing now?" someone muttered. Ignoring the whispers, Young-ho slammed 2 fresh trays of dice onto the table. The stage was set for a rematch. But just across the smoky room, Cheon locked onto our protagonist with an icy, piercing stare. A chilling, unspoken threat lingered in his eyes. Meanwhile, Charlie's stack of chips vanished into thin air. He sat there, frozen, struggling to process the sudden massacre of his funds. On paper, the odds looked perfectly even. An absolute 50-50 shot. To the untrained eye, our boy was just caught in a brutal streak of terrible luck. "Got any chips left?" Young-ho sneered. Charlie patted down his pockets, finally tossing a crumpled, worthless piece of trash onto the felt. Across the gambling floor, another desperate prisoner had just watched his entire fortune get completely wiped out. Snapping under the pressure, the guy lunged forward, roaring in pure rage as he clawed at the table. "You lying bastards. I'm not handing my cash over to a pack of dirty scammers." He wildly slashed a makeshift screwdriver through the air, but a massive fist violently clamped down on his wrist. Chon Ryong towered over him, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Funny, you weren't screaming like a pig when you were cashing in." You got proof we rigged this? The prisoner stammered, his gut screaming that the math was rigged, but his empty hands held absolutely zero evidence. The casino boss casually brushed him off, warning the screaming loser to shut his mouth before he ruined the vibe for the paying VIPs. As he issued the threat, his eyes subtly drifted right back to Charlie. Completely cleaned out and lacking any hard evidence, our hero slumped back to his gloomy cell. But wait. Every single moment of that humiliating defeat, it was flawlessly calculated. The second the iron door slammed shut, two of his cellmates pulled. Charlie's dramatic losing streak was nothing but a brilliant smokescreen to distract the pit bosses. While all eyes were glued to his sinking chips, Gunham and Majin slipped the evidence away. If Chan's empire was built on lies, the secret was hiding right there in the decks. Meanwhile, deep in the shadows of the prison, the casino kingpin was delivering ruthless payback to the loudmouth from earlier. Tears, apologies, frantic begging, none of it mattered. The guy had outlived his usefulness. Blood-curdling shrieks echoed down the concrete hallway as a silhouette stepped into the dim light. It was Yong-ho, bowing his head in apology to Chan. He took the blame for letting our boy stir up a scene at his station. But Chan Ryong barely even blinked, waving it off with chilling apathy. Don't sweat, just keep the games running and the cash flowing. The underground boss could not fathom why this rookie carried such a burning, lethal grudge, but it did not matter. If Charlie even thought about crossing the line one more time, Chan was more than happy to bury him 6 feet under. Cut back to cell block 36. Gunham struck gold. Hidden deep in the chaotic patterns of the card backs were faint microscopic circles of varying sizes. A perfectly engineered, marked deck. The dealer could read every hand without ever flipping a card. Charlie finally had his silver bullet. The trap was set. Now, it was just a brutal race to see who would drag the other to the grave first. You see, whenever bankrupt inmates signed those shady loan guarantees, a very special welcome committee waited for them outside the prison gates. Those mysterious contracts. They were literal death warrants for illegal organ harvesting. The syndicate was quite literally booking fresh Type O kidneys in advance. Chan wasn't just running an underground gambling ring. He was a high-level butcher in the black market flesh trade. A shady partner had recently whispered a grim warning in his ear. Play in the dark long enough, and the monsters will eventually find you. If the feds ever raided their operation, the corrupt mayor would vanish like smoke, leaving Chan to take the brutal fall. But the kingpin did not flinch. He honestly believed he was invincible. In his twisted mind, enough cold, hard cash could erase absolutely any disaster. Armed with the explosive proof needed to completely decapitate Chan's empire, Charlie marched straight back into the lion's den that very night. The game plan was terrifyingly simple. Plop down at the high-stakes table, rip the disguise off the rigged deck in front of a massive crowd, and watch Chan's criminal empire burn to ash. But the boss was already one step ahead. Bypassing the dealers, Chan dragged up a chair intending to slaughter Charlie himself. Our boy had no clue what kind of twisted trick the boss was plotting, but honestly, it was the perfect setup. It completely spared him the hassle of hunting the head honcho down in the shadows. The instant the supreme boss took a seat on the velvet, felt the entire prison yard froze. Every single pair of eyes. Since Charlie demanded to pick the deck, Chan proposed a wildly simple game of memory match. Turn over 2 identical numbers. Boom, it is a hit, and you maintain complete control of the board. Pull a blank and you instantly forfeit your turn. The only way to survive was possessing a flawless, razor-sharp photographic memory. If you knew the hidden marks on the deck, you basically had a guaranteed win. If you didn't, you'd be bled dry until your pockets were empty. But here's the kicker that caught Charlie off guard. This time around, the backs of the gunmen broke into a cold sweat, guessing the marks were just microscopic. But Magion's sharp eyes confirmed the chilling truth. The deck was completely spotless. Chan flashed a wicked smirk, his voice dripping with arrogance. Our joint only deals with high-end imported decks. Since you rookies have never stepped foot in a real gambling hall, let's kick things off with a basic matching game. The truth was, Chan had figured out ages ago that Gunnaman and Magion were swiping cards from the deck. With Charlie's excuse completely blown out of the water, Cheon slammed a massive brick of cash onto the table to open the betting. Problem was, Charlie showed up with empty pockets. Catching on, the dealer slid over that terrifying organ donation waiver, a literal menu putting a harsh price tag on every single body part. Charlie froze, staring dead ahead. The floor manager leaned in, sneering. "What is wrong? You getting cold feet?" Gunnaman and Magyan were internally screaming, knowing full well this match was totally rigged against them. If he just backed down right now, he could still walk away in one piece. But a split second later, the entire room sucked in their breath. Because this absolute madman pushed all his chips to the center. He literally bet every single organ inside his own body. Gunnaman and Magyan looked like their brains had just short-circuited. They knew the house was cheating, yet this lunatic was practically volunteering for the butcher's table. With the gruesome stakes locked in, the memory game officially kicked off. Charlie made the opening move. He flipped an 8 of spades, followed by a 9 of hearts. A total bust. Now the spotlight shifted to Chan, who casually turned over the 9 of clubs. All he needed to do was tap that 9 of hearts Charlie just exposed and he would score a point. The crowd of inmates buzzed, swearing that Chan had some insane beginner's luck. But the floor manager knew better. Luck had zero to do with it. Chan had every single card's location burned into his brain. Why? Because he and the dealer were secretly teaming up from the jump. It was a flawless hustle, with absolutely no physical proof. Their targets were meant to just sit helpless, as they were bled out piece by piece. Honestly, Chan thought the whole setup was hilarious. Looking back, there was a time when he actually viewed his own dad as his ultimate hero. He adored the hard-working guy who clocked in every shift and brought home the bacon. But that picture-perfect life? Total garbage. The second his old man stepped into a gambling den, he transformed. The guy ultimately racked up a soul-crushing debt of $500 million to the local loan shark. And the sickest joke of all, right up to his dying breath, his dad never even realized he was getting played by a rigged machine. John swore right then and there he would never end up as some pathetic sucker. So he crossed over to become the predator running the scams. Snapping back to reality, Charlie was currently getting completely slaughtered on the table. The peanut gallery was ruthlessly trashing him. They jeered at him to save his tears for the operating table. But that is exactly when our guy decided to pull back the curtain and expose their dirty little trick. Out of nowhere, he flipped a flawless pair of queens, instantly followed by a perfect pair of 5s. Sure, a lucky streak was cool, but it was mathematically impossible to close the gap against the 16 cards Chan had already locked down. Except Charlie's hands started moving like lightning. Flip after flip, he did not miss a single beat. Every single card he touched was a dead-on match. Chan's brain totally misfired. The entire system relied on the fact that only he and the dealer held the master layout. But right then, the dealer shot Charlie a very knowing smirk. Let's rewind to closing time earlier that day, when Yonho spotted a crumpled note on the floor. It was the exact same piece of paper Charlie had tossed his way. Scribbled right there in plain ink, a specific time, and a hidden meeting spot. Yonho walked right into the rendezvous precisely on schedule. Without skipping a single beat, our protagonist hit him with a brutal truth bomb. I already know the dirty little secret hiding inside your decks. But our guy was also playing chess while everyone else played checkers. He knew that the very second the casino bosses realized their stash was swiped, that's exactly why he didn't drag Yonho out here just to throw him under the bus. He set up this secret sit-down to throw him a desperate lifeline. See, the vast majority of the dealers only slaved away for Chan because they were drowning in debt to him. Worse yet, they had literally put their own organs on the line as collateral. So as long as Yonho agreed to play along, Charlie promised to wipe that massive debt completely clean for him. But Yonho was terrified to take that huge gamble. In response, Charlie shot back, "Before you get released, are you seriously going to scrape together enough cash to pay off Chon Ryong?" In exactly 1 week, if Yonho stepped foot outside those prison walls, still carrying that massive burden, his gruesome fate was crystal clear to absolutely everyone. Nobody wants their first taste of freedom to end strapped down on a freezing, bloody operating table. Charlie's request for Ji Young-ho was dead simple. He just needed the dealer to rip the lid off the casino's filthy scams right in front of the whole crowd. Taking his cue, our boy swept up the leftover cards in one smooth motion, flashing a sly smirk. Should I call this incredible luck, or is my memory just that flawless? Truth is, I teamed up with the dealer. and memorized the exact position of every single card before the game even started. The words barely left his mouth before the entire room absolutely exploded in outrage. Stepping up, Young Ho dropped another bombshell. Every single game in this hellhole has been completely rigged from the start. He offered to break down exactly how they cheated at every single table. Instantly, the furious inmates locked their deadly glares straight onto the casino boss. Chon growled in a low, dangerous tone, demanding they back down. But a split second later, Charlie's fist ruthlessly smashed into his jaw, sending him crashing to the dirt. They had all the excuse they needed. The arrogant casino owner had publicly declared that if they were caught cheating, the rival block leaders could rip him to shreds however they saw fit. And Charlie fully intended to make good on that promise and butcher him right then and there. Suddenly, the scene shifts. A pathetic man completely consumed by his gambling addiction had racked up a staggering debt of over 100 million with vicious loan sharks. To settle the score, his own flesh and blood had been hollowed out, selling off every organ just to pay the tab. The flashback reveals Chon staring at his own reflection, quietly tending to his father, who lay trapped in a silent coma. Cold as steel, the ruthless organ trafficker sneered at him. Is this some kind of pathetic last-minute family loyalty? But Chon just burned one brutal truth into his brain. Without cold hard cash, even your closest flesh and blood are nothing but meat to be sold. With that twisted mindset, Chonryo marched straight into the deadliest juvenile prison in all of South Korea to build his underground casino empire. But the moment he got caught slipping, Charlie violently ripped off his untouchable mask. Under the prison's law, Chon was now completely at the mercy of the bloodthirsty mob. Charlie drew back his fist, ready to deliver the killing blow himself. But the boss struck like lightning, blasting our boy through the air with a devastating hook. He was out for blood, desperate to make the traitorous dealer suffer the ultimate consequences first. Meanwhile, the other scammers used the explosive chaos as cover, frantically scrambling to escape, with all the damning evidence of their rigged tables. Chon viciously slammed Ji Young Ho face first into the concrete. Our hero instantly charged at the maniac, but Chon effortlessly chucked Young Ho right at him like a rag doll. Blindsided by the human projectile, Charlie was forced to stumble backward once again. The casino kingpin unleashed a savage flurry of heavy blows, making the watching inmate's blood run entirely cold. But in the blink of an eye, Charlie completely vanished from sight. Chon Young smirked, assuming the kid had fled. A split second later, the protagonist materialized right behind him like a ghost. A brutal kick launched the boss off his feet, sending him crashing violently into the distance. Our boy Charlie wasn't about to back down, and he definitely wasn't letting this scammer slip away either. Wiping the dirt off, Chon hissed coldly. "Do not worry. I would never abandon my money and run." But after trading those heavy strikes, Charlie picked up on a crucial detail. The arrogant boss clearly had zero actual combat training. Just as our hero stepped in to end the fight for good, Chon took a swift step back, mocking him. Is knowing how to fight really that big of a deal? Without missing a beat, he drove a vicious knee straight into the boy's gut, perfectly exploiting Charlie's split second of hesitation. Chon violently spun around, throwing his entire body weight into a massive haymaker that launched Charlie across the room. The smug bastard completely despised idiots who only relied on mindless brute force. Half of the protagonist's battered body had been savagely crushed into a parked car. The surrounding inmates stood frozen in pure shock, never expecting the casino boss to pack such terrifying raw. Dusting off his suit, Chun calmly announced, "What just happened was merely a tiny misunderstanding. There is absolutely nothing wrong with our casino." But just as he said that, Charlie's voice echoed from the wreckage, dripping with a terrifying, unhinged madness he could barely keep locked away. Let's be real. Our boy never gave a damn about finding a solid excuse in the first place. After all, a casino is built for entertainment, right? And Ju Young Hee was itching for a deadly game of hide-and-seek with Chun. The rules were brutally simple. Get caught, and you're dead meat. Chun had chained his entire twisted empire to this very underground den, leaving him absolutely nowhere to run. Ju Young just tilted his head, completely baffled. "How are you still this clueless?" he mocked. "Everything you've built is burning to the ground tonight." But honestly, hide-and-seek felt way too childish. Our anti-hero decided to spice things up and switch the game to dice. He tossed the cubes and rolled a solid 3. The prize: 3 bone-crushing punches straight to Chon Ra-yong's face. The arrogant boss just sneered, spitting out, "You seriously think this little circus act is gonna break me? I'm not some meathead street rat who only knows how to swing his fists like you." Ju Young completely tuned out the trash talk, nonchalantly scooping up the dice for another toss. Suddenly, pure, unadulterated dread pierced right through Cheon's chest. Our guy just stared him down, his voice dripping with ice. "Looks like that massive brain of yours couldn't buy you an ounce of luck." Before the bastard could even choke out a gasp, Ju Young unleashed an absolute blur of fists, hammering him with 6 savage hooks. The beating was so devastatingly brutal that Chon's vision shattered. Years ago, he had desperately hunted down a top recruiter from the notorious Celestial Dragon Syndicate. Slamming down a massive mountain of cash, he begged to buy his way into their ranks. His ultimate obsession: to hoard so much wealth that he couldn't possibly. But the recruiter wasn't impressed by dead presidents. She wanted cold-blooded psychopaths who laughed in the face of the Grim Reaper. Without blinking, Chon snatched the razor-sharp blade right out of her grip. When it came to a payday, he was ready to throw his own humanity out the window. The lunatic actually dragged the screaming steel across his own throat, drawing a sickening line of crimson. That sheer, unhinged insanity was his golden ticket, straight into the heart of the dragon. Once inside the syndicate, Chon plunged even deeper into the abyss. The madman had deliberately locked himself up, pulling the strings, just to infiltrate this hellish juvenile penitentiary. Snap back to reality, and that same fearless boss was now violently shoving his own inmates aside, sprinting toward the exit like a terrified rat. In his panicked mind, the rock-solid proof of his rigged gambling ring was already wiped off the face. Chon knew exactly how this brutal underworld operated. Without hard evidence holding him back, he could completely flip the script. Instantly, Ju Young would be branded as the enemy, triggering every single cell leader to hunt him down like a rabid dog. But wait, Magyam suddenly kicked the doors wide open, dragging the damned cheating evidence right back into the spotlight. Every single rigged betting chip, fake prop, and Mayon made all the inmates look closely. These were the proofs of the rigged bets that the dealers carried with them. Just now, Chunryong still wanted to protect the money he had won. But Charlie's game had not ended yet. A large amount of gasoline was poured directly over Chunryong. Charlie said that this final game was called the test of electrical resistance. He had already said he would turn Chunryong's achievements to ashes. The other inmates had not expected our protagonist to go this far. The guy could not hold on and was so terrified that he actually fainted on the spot. The other inmates regained their senses and immediately rushed towards the scattered bills. The white-haired cell leader had known for a long time that the guy was cheating. With this, Chon Ryong's privileges in the prison had also come to an end. 1 year and 2 months later, Chon Ryong had just gotten out of prison. The organ dealer had already prepared tofu to welcome him. The guy said he would rebuild his life outside as soon as possible. But before that, the organ dealer told him to first pay the money he owed. The money Chon had borrowed from the organ dealer, plus the interest, amounted to a total of 1,200,000,000 won. Unable to return it, Chon Ryong could only end up like the others with his organs extracted. Time returns to the present. The protagonist had already crushed 3 of the celestial dragon seeds. Just when he was thinking about who should be the next target, he discovered that there was actually a stranger standing in cell 36, the white-haired cell leader. Smiled and asked if this is the girl who died in the car accident. Before the words were even finished, Charlie had already swung in front of him. The white-haired cell leader's mouth was tightly covered. Charlie told Gu Namin to bring a pillow. That way, the screams could be muffled and would not reach the hallway. The white-haired cell leader was often so bored in prison that he felt like he was going to go crazy. He was even so bored at the cell leader's meeting that he started counting the curses left on the walls by those who had been there before him. The white-haired cell leader wanted some excitement. He longed for that feeling of dopamine flowing through his whole body. And then Charlie entered his field of vision. That arrogant and ruthless aura was unforgettable at first sight. The white-haired cell leader's dopamine almost burst, but now that his mouth was covered, he could not even explain himself. Seeing that our protagonist's fist was about to fall on him, the white-haired cell leader held up the drawing of the crimson fire dragon that Charlie had made. He had come to help our boy. The white-haired cell leader kicked away the protagonist's binding. He could tell that our boy was looking for that dragon tattoo before speaking. The white-haired boy wanted to clear up the misunderstanding first. He had no intention of doing anything with the photo. He had simply dropped it by accident while leafing through the sketchbook. The white-haired boy said he really wanted to help Charlie annihilate all those dragons. But our protagonist bluntly told him to get lost. The white-haired boy said meaningfully, "You are even more obtuse than I thought. The cell leaders really can impose their authority throughout the prison. But if you keep acting so recklessly, other cell leaders could murder you. There are much more dangerous people in the juvenile prison than you think. Even so, are you still going to reject me?" But even if he made it sound convincing, Charlie still could not trust an ally who had appeared suddenly, out of nowhere. Clearly, there was no benefit in all this for the white-haired boy. The protagonist asked him directly, "What exactly do you want to get out of this?" The white-haired boy thought seriously for a moment, and in the end, it was as if he could only come up with one answer: to get a little more excited. The next day, Christian believers came to the juvenile prison to preach. The inmates who had not seen women in a long time instantly became restless. Looking at the sign that said, "Sky Cathedral," the protagonist's memories were dragged by force back to the past. Back then, he often hid in a small room of the church, simply because it allowed him to avoid that trash of a father of his, Lee Da-jun. Whoever had sneaked out of the orphanage, she always managed to find him. Both of them had difficult lives. At that moment, Miss Unja from the orphanage came to take Da-yun back on behalf of the nun. Lee Da-yun, who had sneaked out and was afraid of being punished, could only hide with Charlie in the small room. But what surprised our boy now was that Miss Unja had also appeared in this missionary group. At lunchtime, the believers handing out the boxed meals seemed disgusted, because the inmates there were extremely rude and often even made offensive gestures. However, the burly cell leader tearfully thanked them for preparing the food. The believers thought this guy must be Catholic, but after the burly cell leader finished making the sign of the cross, what came out of his mouth was, "Namu Amitabha." The believers froze on the spot. At that moment, Charlie met Miss Unja in the small room. The three of them had often played together in the past. Miss Unja felt sad about the death of Da-yun. She asked the protagonist, "You must have felt very lonely." Back when they were still in school, Miss Unja often asked Charlie to hang out. But almost always, our protagonist already had plans with Lee Da-yun. Now Unja was telling him, "You are alone. You still have me." At that moment, the voices of the prison guards were heard from outside. They too were about to go get their boxed meals and eat. Only then did Miss Unja remember that she still had to go hand out the meals. Charlie hoped that after getting out in 3 years, he could still see her again. But Miss Unja said she would return next week because the church had decided to volunteer at the juvenile prison every Sunday. While handing out the food, Unja was very kind to all the inmates. But the other believers were disgusted by what they considered a deliberately faked attitude on her part. They thought the rumors about Miss Unja going in and out of motels with older men were probably true. When Charlie, who had gone to the cafeteria to eat, heard all of that, he was completely paralyzed. After lunch, the nun led everyone in prayer. The inmates listened sleepily. But as soon as the prayer ended, the nun suddenly announced, "No matter who you are, today, you can be freed from sin. Just for today, everyone is free." The girls went up on stage and started dancing provocatively. Some of the inmates watching from below were so worked up and excited that they could not contain themselves. They wanted to go to the bathroom. Once the performance was over, the girls returned to the dressing room to change clothes. The 2 inmates who had wanted to go to the bathroom earlier were now hiding outside the door. They were eavesdropping with obscene smiles and stretched out their arms, wanting to push the door and spy. Our protagonist asked coldly, "What are you doing?" In the next second, the force of a punch smashed into them. The 2 peeping inmates were instantly knocked down, But the one who had attacked was not Charlie. The burly cell leader said in a low voice, "The seventh commandment, you shall not covet. God will not forgive your kind of disrespect." The girls in the dressing room also heard the commotion. Miss Unja came out and asked Charlie what happened. Then it was as if she saw something terrifying, and she was so scared that she immediately... A week later, Miss Unja's church returned to the prison to preach. At the same time, in the donated supplies storage room, Charlie, who was helping to move merchandise, was already exhausted. He looked doubtfully at the 3 inmates in front of him, who were holding knives. "What do you want?" Without saying a word, the 3 raised their knives and stabbed in the direction of our boy. But the protagonist swung a case of bottled water and knocked them down directly. Then he sprayed the 3 with the bottled water that had been pierced. Charlie realized that they were not the masterminds. He easily subdued the 3 of them and coldly asked, "Who sent you?" Upon hearing the noise, a prison guard opened the door of the storage room to check with the light from outside. Charlie finally realized that Miss Yuna was also in the storage room. Her outer clothing was also scattered on the floor. She raised her hand, pointed at Charlie, and told the prison guard that she had been assaulted. Because of this, Charlie was sent to solitary confinement for another 10 days. This time, not even the prison guard could continue showing him favoritism, because there was surveillance from the Ministry of Justice in the isolation block. Our protagonist could not understand it. Why had Miss Yuna said that? At the same time, in the prison parking lot, Miss Yuna was actually meeting with the pastor. It turned out that in the past, Yuna had often used seduction traps to scam men, and the pastor had always been following her, calling himself the judge of heretics. Now he was going to use Miss Yuna to judge Charlie. In the isolation cell, Charlie was also repeatedly reconstructing what had happened. It was obvious that all of this had been a trap set by someone. Those 3 attackers had only been there to buy time. The true purpose was to use Miss Yuna to frame him for assault. But at the last moment, Miss Yuna had regretted it. She changed her statement and told the prison guard that Charlie had saved her. But until the truth was clarified, everyone still had to be taken away from there first. The protagonist could not understand it. Who exactly had given instructions to Miss Yuna? And why had she changed her story at the last moment? Charlie asked the prison guard, "Help me call someone." At that moment, Namgung Joseph was grimly interrogating Miss Yuna. "Why did you give up when Miss Yuna said she wanted to stop the judgment?" Namgung Joseph said in a low voice, "I have hidden indecent videos of you in my hands. If Yuna did not continue working for him as she had done before, then something would also happen to her mother." Pushed to the limit, Yuna shouted furiously, "I am going to call the police and report your crimes." Her words were cut abruptly by a scream. Namgung Joseph had decided that Miss Yuna had already been infected by the energy. He was going to purify her immediately, and at that time, there was basically no one in the prison parking lot. But just when Namgung Joseph was about to make his move, for some reason, Charlie appeared there from solitary confinement. Looking at him, Namgung Joseph asked, "Can you wait a moment? I still have something to attend to here." Charlie directly pressed the button to close the bus door, because now he also had something to attend to. The person Charlie had asked the guard to call was precisely that white-haired cell leader who had once said he wanted to help him. The white-haired guy, in fact, looked around with envy. "Your single isolation cell is quite nice." But the protagonist had no time to talk nonsense with him, since the white-haired guy said he wanted to join forces and annihilate those dragons. "Then prove it first. Show me if you are worth using." The white-haired guy stayed silent for a moment. He asked the protagonist, "How do you want me to help you?" He could hardly wait to have some fun. Inside the bus, Charlie coldly warned Namgung Joseph, "Stay away from Yuna." But Namgung Joseph shamelessly said, "This is just a religious ritual." When his huge body pressed down, even the bus seat creaked from the tension. The protagonist burst forward in an instant. A strong punch crashed hard against Namgung Joseph. "How dare you do that kind of thing to Miss Yuna?" In the eyes of Charlie, that kind of crime deserved to be cut into pieces. But even after taking several hits, Namgung Joseph was still standing. He scoffed and praised Charlie. "Your strikes are really precise." It was the first time Namgung Joseph saw someone who hit a vital point with every strike, and he even felt curious to know who had taught the protagonist. Charlie kicked again and replied coldly, "It is none of your business." But even after taking a hit to the chest, Namgung Joseph did not flinch in the slightest. He said in a deep voice, I never learned to fight humans, because I already possess a body blessed by God. After a loud crash, the girl Unha covered her mouth in disbelief. Namgung Joseph, who called himself a messenger of God, was about to carry out his mission of judging the heretics. During a summer Bible camp, Miss Unha had once confided her experiences to others. Due to the debts left by her father, she had been forced to separate from her mother. Unha's wish was simply that one day she could live together with her mother. Namgung Joseph, who had also attended the camp, heard all this. He later approached Unha alone and told her that he could solve the debt problem. The condition was to help him judge the heretics along with him, that is, to carry out seduction traps, honey traps. If Miss Unha refused, something would happen to her mother. Now Namgung Joseph was going to judge the heretic who had corrupted Unha Charlie. The next second, the back of his head was hit hard. Miss Unha waved her umbrella trying to stop Namgung Joseph. But right after that, Ju Young was violently thrown away. Namgung Joseph slapped Unha in the face. He had decided that Unha had already fallen into heresy. He had to act himself and purify her completely. But Namgung Joseph's body suddenly tensed. The intense pain made him lose control instantly, and the next second he spat out a mouthful of blood. Ju Young frowned. You know it yourself, right? Every blow you received is directed at your Even a body supposedly blessed by God cannot withstand internal injuries like those. And the pain that Ju Young was feeling was nothing in comparison with the suffering that Unha had endured. The protagonist grabbed the cleaning supplies from the bus. For a predator like Namgung Joseph, whether by physical or chemical means, Ju Young was going to take away his manhood completely. The guy threw a whole row of seats at the protagonist. His fist struck with force, and right after, Joseph dropped the act. This disgusting religious game ended here, but the next second he felt another jolt in his chest. His internal injuries had already become severe enough to numb him. The boy even kindly reminded him that if he moved again, his internal injuries would only worsen. Their fists slammed hard against each other's faces. The bully could not understand it. His punch was clearly heavier, so why could Charlie still withstand it? In the blink of an eye, the two exchanged several more blows. The big guy realized that his body was reaching its limit. In that case, he could only look for the lady and use her as a hostage. Our boy mocked him. That supposed body blessed by God ends up depending on taking hostages to stay alive. The size difference did not matter at all compared to the body of his bastard father. This was nothing. Amgun finally collapsed. But he kept laughing because he had filmed the whole process of Estaba ansioso por ver qué expresión tendría la madre de la chica cuando viera los videos. Pero en ese momento, el prota recitó con calma los crímenes que ese tipo no había expuesto. 9 attempts and 4 cases of unwanted. He was not up to par. Our boy raised his hand and fired the taser straight at Joseph's crotch. He had already said he was going to neuter this disgusting creep completely. Having been shaken himself, the protagonist knew very well how to make sure that a man would never again be able to get it up for the rest of his life. At that moment, the girl asked in a low voice, "Are you okay?" Charlie returned the question. "If you were being threatened, why didn't you say so earlier?" And she hesitated and asked, "How did you know?" Actually, the MC had noticed it from the details, whenever she wanted to say something. But she didn't dare. She tangled her hair unconsciously. Our boy was annoyed with himself. He should have realized it earlier. He warned the little nun, never do something so dangerous again. Just then, the white-haired guy sighed from the side. Young couples really are sweet. He said that a single dog like him was taking a stab straight to the heart. Our hero froze, because this guy was suddenly driving the bus. But the guy could not even distinguish the accelerator from the brake. So he decided he did not care and just stepped on one at random. Roger said he was taking revenge on behalf of single people all over the world and was going to send all couples to hell. The bus roared toward the prison wall. At the same time, Yu Jong-chan, captain of the Heavenly Dragon Action Squad, was disposing of the bodies of other gang members. When regular gangs dispose of corpses, they just seek to destroy the evidence. But the Heavenly Dragon's method consists of keeping the bodies fresh so they can be used repeatedly later on. The gang member they were about to dispose of roared, "You Heavenly Dragon bastards! You do not even assign territories anymore. You even dare to trample on allied gangs. If you do not stop, The group will end up very badly, sooner or later. He only replied, "Then go see how it slowly happens from hell." After disposing of the body, he received a phone call. On the bus, Charlie could not understand what the white-haired guy was doing. If they kept driving forward, that would count as a prison break. But just when they were about to crash into the wall, the driver gave a sudden yank to the steering wheel. The bus skidded into a drift and crashed sideways into the wall. After confirming that Yuna was okay, the protagonist turned around and shouted angrily, "You pighead, are you crazy?" But the driver guy told them to run quickly, because with such a huge commotion, the guards would arrive any second. Then the white-haired guy explained to them that this way they could put all the blame on Joseph. Since he had left without permission and evaded surveillance, there was no way he could justify himself. Now that the matter was resolved, it was time for the white-haired savior Roger to leave. With a wicked smile, he said the little couple should enjoy some time alone. Our boy told the girl to go back quickly. The nun would be worried. But Una started rummaging through her clothes. She said this was something she had to give to our boy. It was a little bear keychain. Not long ago, the three of them were still joking together in front of a claw machine. But apart from the three little bears that Lee Da-yun had won, the other two had not gotten even one. Just three little bears, perfectly enough for each of them to have one. Lee had once heard a saying, "As long as the symbol endures, no matter how far apart people are, they can still feel that they are together." And Dayan had said that the more she looked at this bear, the more it looked like her. The young lady found it while checking Lee's belongings. She handed the bear to Charlie, and then it was also time for her to go. The little nun had more things she wanted to say, but somehow the words would not come out. But in the end, she still said loyally, "If I confess next time, sister, do not be angry." Back in solitary confinement, the protagonist felt a bit helpless because the guy Roger had actually envied his private cell. So he had deliberately caused trouble and gotten himself sent to solitary confinement. Also, taking advantage of the opportunity, our protagonist asked him, "How exactly did you get me out of solitary confinement?" The guard had clearly said that there were people guarding this place, but the white-haired guy had not only gotten a taser gun, but he also knew about Namgung's crimes. What the protagonist wanted to know even more was, who exactly are you? Roger calmly said, "That is a secret. Anyway, I have already proven my worth." So according to their deal, the protagonist would cooperate with him. Roger immediately got excited and kept hitting the wall. Charlie told him to just say it, once and for all. How exactly are you going to help? But from the solitary confinement cell next door, only a steady breathing could be heard. Our boy was left speechless. Do not tell me this guy Roger has already fallen asleep. At the same time, Yu Ji-hwan, a recruiter for the Heavenly Dragon, he reached the depths of the mountains because Cha Kang-ryong's villa, the Cheonryong Pavilion, was located there. Yu was puzzled as to why the second in command of the dragon would live in a mountain villa instead of a skyscraper in the city center. Cha Kang-ryong had just finished exercising. Ju Kang-chan was preparing tea for him on the side. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Kang-ryong asked Yu, "What do you need to report?" The moment he heard it was about the young master, the leader's gaze turned cold instantly. The Cheonryong Pavilion was so vast that it looked like a city. He walked toward the artificial lake and told Ju to speak. And the man informed him that after entering the juvenile prison, the young master has faced off one after another, with several cell leaders. The result was, without suspense, the young master won every time, and crushed several of the Heavenly Dragon's seeds. This speed was unprecedented, and Ju believed the young master's level was amazing, and even the person that Yu Hai-wan had set her eyes on had been defeated by the young master. They had thought that as a father, Cha would surely be pleased, but he only felt disappointment. He was waiting for his son to bloom, but at this moment, not even a bud had appeared. Ju Young was at most just a sprout desperately growing upward. As the leader's son, he shouldn't be only at this level. He had to find a way to make his son bloom ahead of time. In the prison, the inmates in charge of carrying the trash complained non-stop. They said it would be better to burn this rotten prison to the ground. Nearby, Choi Jun-taek, the leader of Room 37, let out a cold laugh. He told them, "If you have the guts, then try it." but they were just venting with their mouths. Seeing that these pieces of trash still dared to act so brazenly, Choi got even more annoyed. He had once personally beaten a teacher so brutally that he was severely injured just because the teacher talked too much. Now, he was also beating these big-mouthed delinquents. Someone from his cell informed him about Ju Young's situation. Originally, Leader Choi didn't want to bother with that, but our boy was becoming increasingly more arrogant, and that infuriated him. Back in cell 36, all the inmates fell to their knees in unison to welcome the boss back. While the protagonist had been away, not much had happened in the cell. At that moment, he noticed that there was a new inmate in the place. Kunamin said, "This newcomer is big, but a bit slow. He is actually not a bad person." At that instant, a guard informed cell 36. "This afternoon you will go out to do forced labor outdoors. Raising poisonous insects means locking several venomous bugs in a jar and letting them devour each other. The one that survives at the end becomes the most venomous insect of all. The juvenile prison is the jar, where the dragon raises poisonous insects." Cha already wanted his son to swallow more poison and of greater potency. He had placed an extremely venomous bug inside a guy ruthless to the extreme. Choi Jun-taek found out that our boy's cell had an outdoor work shift. He had been sick of Ju Young's arrogant attitude for a long time. Choi didn't care about justifications, or the lack thereof. Kill him first. Shortly after, the protagonist was lying in a corner covered in blood. Koo Nam-in and Ma-gyun were shocked on the spot, but the protagonist quickly got up again as if he had simply taken a fall. He frowned and complained, "This red paint that splashed on my clothes is very hard to wash." The inmates of cell 36, having finished their work assignment, were all exhausted to the point of collapse. But as they walked back to the cell, they saw the red paint on the floor again. Koo Nam-in looked puzzled. Why would there be red wall paint here? But Ju Young recognized it at a glance. It wasn't paint. It was blood. The leader of room 37, Choi, was actually lying in the corner, soaked in blood. Cha Kang-ryong would wait for the day his son bloomed, but he also knew that before blooming, his son could die at any moment. If this boy took a single false step, he would be uprooted immediately. That extremely venomous bug that the dragon leader had put in the prison was now lurking right next to his precious son. All the other inmates were talking about who the hell did this, but Ma-gyun acutely felt that the newcomer was suspicious, because during the outdoor work earlier, the new inmate had disappeared for a short time, and when he returned, he still had a bit of blood stuck to the sole of his shoe. At that moment, Gunnamin shouted and pointed at the newcomer, because the newcomer's body was covered in bruises and knife scars. The newcomer scratched his head and said in a low voice, "My dad did this." Beside him, Charlie's face immediately darkened. At school during physical education class, the protagonist changed into his gym clothes. This caused murmurs among his classmates. The scars on his body made him endure those contemptuous looks time and time again. That feeling was truly disgusting. After the work was finished, the people in room 36 were taking a shower. When the protagonist saw that the new inmate had no shampoo, he passed him his own. The new inmate frowned. "Are you pitying me?" The protagonist replied sharply, "Do you think I have had such a good life that I am in a position to pity anyone?" Both of their lives were filthy and miserable to begin with. Our hero rushed him. "Hurry up and finish washing." When the new inmate finished, only the protagonist remained in the shower room, staring at him. Charlie asked, "Don't you think it is strange why two people who have never met would have exactly the same scars?" Before the new inmate could answer, the protagonist grabbed him by the throat. Because the protagonist knew that this absolutely could not be a coincidence. These scars were clearly left by that man. The hero demanded coldly, "Cha, Kang-ryong sent you." "Right." But the new inmate just stayed silent and looked at him gloomily. Charlie's fingers tightened slowly. He was going to pry that mouth open by force. Many years ago, the Heavenly Dragon recruiter Yu had selected a group of children with potential for Cha Kang-ryong, and the dragon himself knew nothing about it, so Cha could deal with those children however he wanted. But in the leader's eyes, they were all trash. What he wanted were fierce dogs. He needed them to tear apart his enemies. He gave the order on the spot, except for that big guy. Get rid of the rest. Yoonho had expected that the people he had selected with such care would not meet Cha's standards. At that moment, things changed suddenly. That big boy was actually bitten hard on the neck by another child. Seeing that scene, Cha Kangryong instead looked satisfied because that child's eyes were as fierce as those of a hound. That was exactly what he wanted. Kangryong told the boy that from today on, he should call him father. And now, facing Charlie's interrogation, the new inmate replied coldly, "I am just that man's hound." Hearing that, the protagonist froze for a moment. Originally, he had been wondering why the new inmate did not have the Crimson Fire Dragon tattoo. Now it seemed that the new inmate had never joined the Heavenly Dragon at all. He was someone whom Cha Kang-yong had personally raised by his side. The protagonist insisted, "Why were you lurking by my side? And why did you get rid of that cell leader who wanted to harm me? Although you clearly had several opportunities to act, you never killed me." Lowering his voice, the boy asked, but the new inmate never said a single word. The protagonist could only let out a long sigh. In the next second, his hand suddenly exerted force. The new inmate's body was lifted completely off the ground. Subdued by Charlie, he was dragged and slammed against a locker, his back hitting the wall hard. The protagonist's fingers continued to squeeze. He ordered sharply, "Speak." But even after being beaten unconscious, the new inmate did not say a single word. Our boy knew very well that he had had countless opportunities to defend himself. However, from beginning to end, he had never intended to resist. Our boy could not understand what he was planning exactly. After that, the protagonist kept a close watch on the new inmate for several days, even when another inmate spilled soup on him by accident, as if nothing had happened. But he knew it was impossible for the dragon leader to have sent someone without a reason. At that moment, Gu Namin and Ma Jion were chatting idly beside him. The new inmate watched them silently from not too far away. That night, because a construction job was scheduled on the back hill for the next day, the four of them were suddenly called to cut the grass. The protagonist felt even more strongly that something was wrong. The scythes to cut the grass flashed coldly through the weeds. The new inmate suddenly asked, "Ma, are you close to Charlie?" Before Ma could answer, the new inmate stabbed him right in a vital point. Gu saw that the grass there was too dense and was about to go help, when in the next second our boy heard a scream. He immediately ran toward the sound, but arrived a step too late. Looking at him, the new inmate asked, "Do you understand now the reason why that man sent me to your side?" Under Gangren's training, the new inmate's canine teeth had already become terrifyingly sharp. As long as he wanted to, he could bite anything to death. Coincidentally, the Supreme Leader had entrusted him with 3 tasks. First, enter the protagonist's territory and eliminate external interference. Second, monitor his son and find the people closest to him. Third, kill them in front of the protagonist, the new inmate said coldly. "All this is to make me his son. Stronger," Charlie finished for him. At that moment, 2 other voices sounded as well, and the new inmate froze on the spot. He was sure he had stabbed both of them in their vital points. It turned out that Ma and Gu had long hidden pigskin pads under their clothes. During the past few days, the protagonist had been analyzing Cha's purpose. He had been constantly forcing himself to think. To make his son stronger, what extremes would that bastard go to? He had not expected that Cha Gangren would actually use such a disgusting method again. It made the protagonist feel disgusted. He punched the new inmate and sent him flying. The boy told the other 2 to go out first and call the guards, because he had clearly seen it from the very beginning. Everything that had happened had been arranged by the warden under Cha's orders. So here, no matter what happened, nothing was strange anymore. What he wanted the guards to come up for now was to collect a corpse. The new inmate had been abandoned by his parents since childhood, and due to his gloomy personality, he had even been kicked out of the orphanage, only to be later sold by his supposed friends to human traffickers. Even the traffickers thought he was too thin and did not want him, but he escaped relying on his innate, monstrous strength. And at that moment, he made a decision. As long as they do not abandon me again, I will do anything. After that, like a stray dog, Yu He-wan offered himself to our boy. He asked Yu Gangchang, the captain of the Celestial Dragon Action Squad, "Between the leader's 2 sons, who do you think will win?" He knew very well that both had been instructed personally, so at first, their fighting styles would inevitably be very similar. And sure enough, every movement of Charlie and the new inmate almost overlapped. Both trained by Cha Gangrin since childhood, they now possessed considerable strength. Li Guan frowned. Do you mean their skills are more or less the same? The new inmate also thought the same. He slammed another heavy punch into Charlie's abdomen. But after taking that punch head on, the protagonist understood that they were not the same at all. The new inmate still wanted to keep pressing, but our boy counterattacked with a punch and forced him back. Even if they had been instructed by the same person, their strength could never be exactly identical. Cornered against the wall and beaten, the new inmate gritted his teeth, reluctant to yield. He tightly grabbed Charlie's arms with both hands. The protagonist could see it clearly. He was outmatched in skill and wanted to rely on brute force to resist. But that path would not work. The next second, the new inmate suddenly bit two of the protagonist's fingers. With the pain piercing through him, the protagonist kicked him away. Whether it was technique or strength, the new inmate had never cared. He was only following Father's order. Kill Charlie. In the next second, his vision was stained with blood. The protagonist's fist fell right after that. He warned the new inmate, "If you do not want to die too miserably, then do not mention the name of that disgusting bastard in front of me." After receiving a series of heavy blows, the new inmate finally stopped moving. Not too far away, two knives lay silently on the ground. Yugan Chan believed that this orphan could never defeat the young master, but that was only in a fist fight. If that orphan got a weapon, the outcome could be different. A lock of Charlie's hair was sliced off in an instant. Father had once told the new inmate, "Your talent is a weapon, so pick up a blade, fight, and tear them to pieces." The scars all over the new inmate's body were marks left from learning to use it. Under Father's tutelage, the speed of his blade was terrifying. With a lateral movement, our protagonist crashed into the toolbox to grab the weapon that was next to him. The new inmate did not care how strong Charlie was, even if he was Father's biological son. Today, he only had one thing to do: kill Charlie, according to Father's orders. The protagonist said coldly, "Have I not told you already? If you do not want to die too miserably, do not mention that man in front of me. If you learn to use the knife, how could I, his true son, not have learned it too? A saw can also slowly tear a person apart. You just said father 4 times, so today I will cut you into 4 pieces." The greatest swordsman in Japan was named Miyamoto Musashi, who became famous throughout the country, only after winning more than 60 battles. And the sword proficiency he used originally came from Nitoryu. Nitoryu, with that absolute lethal power, made countless swordsmen fear it. Charlie saw, and the new inmate's sword clashed several times in the blink of an eye. Charlie recognized the new inmate's style. It was like Nitoryu, with a fast speed added to the pressure of wielding a bladed weapon. With both hands, it left the opponent unable to guess where the next strike would fall. This guy's blade was more dangerous than our boy had expected. Their weapons clashed again with a deafening sound. The new inmate smiled with disdain. A saw is just a tool for cutting wood. What they used was something passed down for hundreds and even thousands of years, true swordsmanship. There was no way something like that could be accomplished with just a saw. Since childhood, the new inmate had perfected his sword skill with the 2 blades that Father gave him. Abandoned by everyone since he was young, the new inmate had long ago considered Cha as his only father. Therefore, even if Cha ordered him to assassinate his own biological son, like a hunting dog, the new inmate would still sink his fangs into Charlie's neck without hesitation. But what unsettled him was that, no matter how he looked at it, now the protagonist seemed more like the hunter. Even the fiercest beast would retreat before the new inmate's sword, but the protagonist's eyes looked even more like those of a hunter, cold and murderous. Having learned the use of the sword from Father since childhood, he had engraved a phrase in his bones. You only need to avoid fatal attacks and wait patiently. And the moment your opponent exposes a flaw, you use all your strength to stab them with the blade. Cha had also made his son remember, once you raise a blade, you must kill the other person, or that blade will sooner or later pierce your own heart. The new inmate had also seen it. Charlie had been taking the attacks head-on while waiting for an opening, but it was useless. The new inmate intended to end it all, with this single strike. The next second, the sound of flesh tearing erupted. What the protagonist had been waiting for the whole time was that big move from the new inmate. If what he had in his hand was a knife, the new inmate's head would have already fallen. The teaching that once you raise a weapon you must kill continued to resonate in the protagonist's mind. The boy said coldly, "Using a saw as a weapon also has other advantages. Its irregular teeth can open and tear the skin little by little, forcing you to clearly feel the pain of your flesh, being torn off your bones, being cut, and the pain of your blood vessels and nerves being crushed together. Knife wounds cannot be compared." But the new inmate suddenly asked Charlie, "Are you sure? You who have never killed before really dare to kill me? Hurry up and kill me, or I will kill the people around you, one by one, and in the end, I will tear out your heart." In the next second, another loud bang sounded between them, but the new inmate did not die. At that moment, the protagonist's saw actually broke into pieces. But he had no need to finish the job himself. With the new inmate's wounds, he would bleed to death sooner or later. The new inmate could not understand what our boy was doing, because he had broken the saw's teeth on purpose. What the new inmate understood even less was why he did not kill him afterward. Our boy also went to the infirmary to have his wounds bandaged. Through magium, he learned that the new inmate was severely injured and on the verge of death, and that he had been rushed to a major hospital. And Charlie finally completely uncovered Gang Ryong's plan. First, hurt the people around the protagonist and force him into a rage. Second, keep the boy in prolonged danger and weaken his judgment. Third, induce our boy to kill with his own hands. What Cha really wanted was to force his son to kill and cross the boundary of humanity in the end. The new inmate tried to provoke the boy with words, but instead it made him calm down. Our protagonist had not expected that even in prison he would continue to receive lessons from the dragon leader. The only thing he would ever do according to Cha's wishes would be to take control of this prison. From now on, the protagonist had to free himself from the guy's control. At the same time, no one knew where the ambulance was taking the new inmate. In the past, he had seen with his own eyes how Father abandoned the hunting dogs that failed in their missions. Terrified of being abandoned, the new inmate suddenly tore the intravenous needle from his body. He did not want to return like this, only to be thrown away by Father. But no matter what he did, the ambulance door would not open. In the next second, an icy chill touched his vital point. Yugan-chan said coldly, "A dog that tries to bite off its chain can only be executed on the spot." He asked the new inmate if he had any last words. But the new inmate instead thanked Yu, saying, "Thank you for killing me before I was abandoned." After dealing with the corpse, Yu called Cha. When he learned that his son had still not killed anyone in the end, Cha Gangryong suddenly burst out laughing. He muttered quietly, "You raise a son and he really does not listen to his parents." Cha Gangryong decided to properly educate his son once again. At that moment, the juvenile prison called again. On the other line, the warden shouted anxiously, "Your son has caused trouble." For a moment, Gangryong did not understand. At that exact moment in the prison, Charlie was causing trouble everywhere. Somehow, he had offended each and every one of the cell leaders at the same time. The warden gave our boy some bad news. This time, the protagonist might really die. One winter day more than 10 years ago, Cha was still smuggling weapons with the Russian mafia. To avoid federal surveillance, he had to go to eastern Siberia for a secret deal. But when Cha Gangryong arrived at the agreed location, all that remained was devastation and the corpses of the mafia members. Then an adult brown bear lunged at the great leader. In that instant, he was filled with fear. That was why Charlie had always been curious about where the bear skin that they had at home had come from. The burly man said quietly, "I killed that bear with my own bare hands, of course." Charlie did not believe him. How could a human subdue such a beast barehanded? The leader told his son, "If you knew how to use that, you could do it too." Before his son entered his first year of middle school, he intended to forcibly instill that skill in him. It was the only way to break human limits, the Overheart. Our boy knew very well that his father wanted to keep him locked inside a safe range and make him stronger in his own way. But Charlie would rather die than be controlled by that man, so he decided to create the situation that his father hated most. Our boy put all the money of the cell leaders into the washing machine. The other inmates immediately rushed forward, trying to catch him and drag him before the cell leaders to claim the credit. But the protagonist's target had never been these people. He coldly told them, "Call all the cell leaders here." That arrogant tone instantly ignited everyone's anger, but they were too weak. Our boy took them all down in just a few moves. However, outside the laundry room, another large wave of inmates quickly poured in. But for the protagonist, no matter how many pieces of trash there were, they were still trash. What he wanted was something more dangerous. This level was far from enough. Roger, who had helped Charlie steal the money, crawled out of the washing machine with a wicked smile. He knew that if things continued like this, the other cell leaders would not continue playing dead. The white-haired boy was curious. What exactly was the protagonist trying to do? And how did he plan to end this? This completely undecipherable turn of events was driving his curiosity crazy. The protagonist went out to the courtyard and began to wait. In a short time, all the other cell leaders had also arrived. Because Charlie had taken all their money if this continued, unable to pay tribute, the business operations they had in their hands would close one by one. Naaman and Maginam could not understand at all what Charlie was trying to do, because now he was basically declaring war on the most powerful force of Gimcheon. Block 1, Cell 1 gave our protagonist a chance to explain himself. The boy just answered calmly, "I don't need one." So the other cell leaders immediately gave the order, "Take care of this man who has disrupted the order once and for all." The only method that this father had instilled in his son to overcome human limits was called overheart. Over as transcendence, heart as emotion. Using emotion to shatter the limit. The protagonist's burly father said that it was a state that could make most human abilities leap upward in an instant. As soon as he finished speaking, he slammed a punch into the ground. That was the last lesson that the dragon leader gave his son. At this moment, Charlie faced the fist crashing towards him. He slowly let out his breath, and in the next second, with a single blow, he slammed the two cell leaders charging towards him directly into the ground. Everyone's jaw dropped, because he had instantly taken down two opponents at the level of cell leaders. Even the white-haired boy could not help but murmur in amazement. He had originally been wondering, after having provoked a situation of such magnitude, how Charlie was going to get out of it. But it turned out that our boy had never planned to run away. He was going to use the same power that Cha Gang-ryong had forced. In America in 2003, an ordinary mother lifted an entire car with her own hands. She did this to save her daughter trapped underneath it. In North Korea in 1979, an ordinary person, driven by the desire to escape the dictatorship, swam for 12 hours through rough waters. In Africa in 1732, a warrior continued thrusting his spear for 47 seconds. Even after his heart had stopped, he fought until the enemy tribe was completely annihilated. From time to time, this world produces phenomena that break human limits. It is not about coincidences or miracles, but about emotions overflowing to the extreme, directly rewriting the body. Entering the overheart is the only way to transcend the biological limits of the human species. And at this moment, the only emotion that filled Charlie's heart was a rabid fury towards his father, Cha Gang-ryong. The protagonist would rather die. He would rather not use this skill because to maintain the state, the face of the protagonist's father had to keep appearing in his mind. That detested image made our boy want to throw up. Yoo Hyun-soo, the leader of Cell 12, shouted angrily, "What are you muttering about? Stop acting so arrogant." Having grown up alone since childhood, he hated hearing other people laugh more than anything. He had simply taught those noisy brats a lesson, and everyone had treated him like a demon. Charlie threw a punch, and Yoo Hyun-soo was instantly thrown backward, crashing heavily against the ground. Our protagonist did not care what the others had been through. Lee Jun-hyuk, the leader of Cell 19, who was holding a knife, had already silently fixed his gaze on Charlie's Achilles tendon. He was obsessed with the sound of tendons tearing and ligaments twisting. The moment that sound resonated was enough to make Lee Jun-hyuk tremble with excitement. Since childhood, he had been called a genius due to his abnormal sensitivity to sound. But in the next second, that genius was knocked down by a kick from the protagonist, and even the knife in his hand broke into two pieces. Charlie did not want to waste any more time, so Ryu-chol, the leader of Cell 7, stepped forward, just as he wished this guy intended to end this farce with his own hands. He had never lost in his life. To protect the people around him, he had no choice but to win. But today, he had to taste defeat. Ryu was vastly inferior to the protagonist. The twin leaders of cells 12 and 13 immediately advanced on our boy. Even when they were still babies wrapped in diapers, they could already see the disgust in their mother's eyes. That icy stare turned into cruel abuse as time went by. The protagonist took down the twins with a single strike. What he hated most was hearing anyone mention family in front of him. From the rooftop, the white-haired boy observed everything. He did not expect Charlie to have a hidden ace up his sleeve like this. Won Se-yoon, the leader of Cell 17, charged excitedly toward our hero. He threw punches in both directions, and he was a complete freak. But in the next second, that freak was smashed directly into the ground by the protagonist. The last man praised the strong boy strong enough for him, a man of the celestial dragon, to treat him with respect. Charlie did not expect the last one standing to actually be someone from the dragon. So let's have a real fight. The sunlight broke through the clouds and shone down. The protagonist had already defeated 9 cell leaders, but even this speed was slower than he expected. The absurdity of the scene was so great that even the warden wondered if he was watching the filming of a movie right now. Cha Gi-ryun only wanted to confirm one thing: whether his son had been injured. Just at that moment, the protagonist walked aggressively toward the warden. He snatched the phone from the warden. Then he greeted the father he had not spoken to for so long. Roger on the rooftop could not help but applaud after witnessing a scene like this. He worried he would never again feel that kind of explosive dopamine rush. Although, of course, that only meant not in this prison. On the other side of the phone, when the father heard his son's voice, he asked like an ordinary father would, "Are you eating well?" Charlie said lightly. "The prison food suits my taste better than I expected. There is hot water here. And they let us exercise on schedule. In fact, I am more comfortable in prison than I was at home. I should even thank you for the gift you sent. It has made my monotonous days a little less boring." The protagonist's father fell silent for a moment. Then he said, "As long as you are okay, I feel relieved." But he immediately demanded, "Why did you cause trouble so impulsively?" Our boy replied bluntly, "I simply wanted to break free from the prison controlled by Gang Ryong." He already knew about that place. The protagonist told his father that he better enjoy life while he could before he came looking for him. Afterward, the warden flew into a rage. "What are you guards even good for? There are so many of you, and yet you could not stop a single person." This incident had blown up too much. There was no way to hide it. The warden understood that this prison could no longer hold Cha. He had no choice but to send the protagonist to that place. The warden also didn't want to do that, because he feared our boy would go completely insane if he found out. After all, no father would voluntarily send his son to a place like that. Back in the cell, the protagonist invited the other inmates to a lavish feast. He gave his books to Gu. With Namin's intelligence, if he studied seriously, he could really get into college. Then the protagonist handed writing paper and a notebook to Meijin. He had seen Ma squatting in the corner writing every day. So in that case, he might as well write a letter and send it home. Yu was stunned. "Why do you sound like you were leaving your last words?" Cha looked at him. "You really know how to read the room." At that moment, the guards also rushed the protagonist. "Pack your personal belongings and get out." The boy said that he had finished preparing a long time ago, but he still had things he needed to do, and causing a massive disaster was the fastest way. During this time, thanks to Gyun, he hadn't been so bored. Cha said that he hoped the next time they met would be outside the prison. Namin told our protagonist, "You have to take care of yourself," he told him helplessly. "I have a 20-year sentence. If you get bored, get arrested again sometime and come back to hang out." Cha Gangrong, who had destroyed the Changrong pavilion with his own hands, felt equally helpless. He felt that his son simply didn't understand what it meant for a father to worry about his son. The protagonist still couldn't break the jar to escape. For a bug that breaks the jar and crawls out, what awaits it is only a larger jar, plagued with even more poisonous things. A guard was now taking our boy somewhere. There was no longer any need to hide it from him. In fact, this juvenile prison had another prison that had never been made public. Not long ago, the protagonist was still thinking about how he could break free from his father's control. Then Roger suddenly appeared and told him something interesting. This juvenile prison was not actually just a prison. Beyond that patch of woods, there was another prison built specifically to hold those who had caused major problems. At that time, the white-haired guy had even said, "Don't take it seriously. I'm just mentioning it casually. But Cha asked him to do one thing to steal all the money that the cell leaders had to hand over to the warden. The guard leading the way finally stopped. This was the place specifically used to hold uncontrollable inmates. The second pavilion of the juvenile prison. This was a dangerous place, specifically intended for the detention of uncontrollable prisoners. The protagonist had already prepared for a huge fight, but the prisoners inside seemed too ordinary at first glance. A feeling that something was wrong arose in his heart. The guard took him to the director's office. The director of the second wing of the juvenile prison was named Mao Wanchang. As he looked at the aquarium he had built, which featured a fully functioning ecosystem, it was as if he were admiring a world he had created himself. The inspiration for the system of the second prison came precisely from this aquarium. Despite gathering uncontrollable inmates, its average annual accident rate was only 0.313%. Mao asked our boy, "Do you know why?" The protagonist replied coldly, "No." The head of Pavilion 2 continued explaining. There are many fish in an aquarium. However, they don't tear each other apart like they do in the sea, because inside there's an overwhelmingly dominant superpredator. The shark doesn't need to act. Its mere presence keeps the other fish on guard and prevents unnecessary conflicts. And Mao had seen the recordings. Cha had single-handedly defeated all the cell leaders in the first prison, so he wanted the protagonist to become the new shark of his aquarium. The talent scout of the Heavenly Dragon, Yu Hee-won, knew the boss's background very well. Originally, he had been a famous expert in criminal sociology at an academic society abroad. One day, he suddenly returned to Korea and became the director of a juvenile prison, shocking everyone. To the Heavenly Dragon, Mao Wanchang was also a problematic figure, because unlike an ordinary warden, he could not be easily bought with money or threats. The only thing that mattered to that leader was the prison system he had built. As an academic, it was a study called the shark paradox. Yoon could not understand how something like that could be hidden inside a state-level prison. What he wanted to know most was what exactly the Korean government was doing. The girl understood that this time, the young master was truly in danger. The common inmates of the second prison were the weak fish, and the boss wanted the protagonist to be the shark. He wanted him to hunt freely inside, but Charlie had absolutely no interest in that at all. He ignored Wong and turned around to leave immediately. The burly boss spoke in a deep voice. "For an academic, the moment I explain my theory to an audience that does not understand it is the one that excites me the most." Charlie's body was forcefully pinned against the wall by a monstrous force. Now the guy was going to make him understand his theory personally. The warden of Wing 2 of the juvenile prison had dual American and Korean nationality. He had graduated from the social psychology department of a UPC university. His thesis had not only been recognized by American academic circles, but he had also been heavily recruited by the UN Research Institute for Social Development and by an MIT research center. However, the place he finally chose to settle down was Korea. The leader had only one condition to establish Wing 2 of the juvenile prison. He wanted to turn dangerous youths into subjects for social correction experiments. These were individuals that even the current laws of South Korea could barely handle. This was an extremely dangerous enterprise. And the reason the Korean government approved this absurd plan was not only for his academic achievements, it was also because he had the raw ability to subdue violent criminals. He could do this with his bare hands in cases of emergency. Wong Chang had once served in the Special Operations Forces of the United States Army. At this moment, he fervently wished to know what kind of shark Charlie would be. He threw a downward punch, and a thunderous roar erupted. Fortunately, the boy broke free from the suggestion at the last second. The warden's curiosity could no longer be contained. He wanted to dissect and analyze the protagonist personally. There were 4 sharks imprisoned in this facility, and according to his own definitions, he had already assigned a species. So what he wanted to know most was what kind of shark the 5th one, Charlie, would be. Wong's movement stopped suddenly. He could not understand what had just happened, because he felt as if his fist had crashed against an entire sea. Wong Chang froze for half a second and then burst into loud laughter. He even unconsciously let out a string of praises in English. Then he told the guards to bring that thing. Originally, he had wanted to call the special management class Sharks, but he had not received approval from his superiors. And this black identification tag was the symbol of the special management class in this prison. The black identification tags had absolute authority over the ordinary white tags. Wang Chang knew very well that he had attacked 21 times in total, and Charlie had had even more opportunities than that to counterattack. That attitude of not taking the warden seriously at all fascinated him. It was the first time he had encountered a case he could not define. Wang Chang decided to observe patiently for now, and wait for the protagonist himself to reveal his true nature. At the same time, the inmates of a certain cell also found out that a new shark was arriving. Two of the inmates were discussing in a low voice how to strike the first blow and get rid of the shark. But the moment Charlie entered the cell, the inmate, Yu Tae-san, approached immediately, fawning over him like a dog. Another inmate, Young-ho, even dropped to his knees on the spot and frantically begged the protagonist not to kill him. The protagonist frowned. These were the ordinary fish he had talked about. Charlie looked around his new room, and the conditions were quite decent. Then he heard something else. There was no evening roll call here, and the guards barely interfered, but that only made it stranger. If the inmates could move freely, why was the accident rate still close to zero, under almost no supervision? In the middle of the night, the protagonist quietly got out of bed. He wanted to confirm who the other 4 sharks were, but no matter how hard he pushed, the door would not open. Our boy did not understand it. If the guards barely interfered, then why even lock the doors? He woke up the next day. The other 2 inmates were sneaking around with objects in their hands, planning to ambush him. But the moment they met the hero's gaze, they immediately knelt down and greeted him with respect. Our boy was a little hungry, so he casually asked when the door opens. But Taesung was astonished. The door had already been open for a long time. It turned out that the prison doors opened and closed automatically at fixed times. Once the doors opened, the inmates enjoyed freedom. At the same time, someone arrived at the first prison to meet with Park. Ever since Jong-chan had been brutally beaten by the protagonist, he had started watching him. He noticed that most of the people he picked fights with and attacked were members of the Celestial Dragon. And during that massive fight between the cell leaders, Park had even eavesdropped. He overheard the contents of the warden's phone call. He never saw it coming. Charlie wasn't just some random guy. He was the flesh and blood of Celestial Dragon's absolute second-in-command. Right then, Jungbun, the executive director of Celestial Dragon, pieced it all together mid-conversation. There was zero chance this was just a fluke. Back at the second penitentiary, the other inmates practically hugged the walls to avoid our guy. Why? Because that pitch-black name tag pinned to his chest screamed pure danger. But a gnawing question kept eating at him. Where the hell were the other 4? Young-soo scrambled to lay out the prison hierarchy, explaining that the remaining 4 sharks lurked on entirely different levels. Every single floor operated as an independent turf, and the ground level, that was Charlie's hunting ground now. Tyson chimed in with a grim reminder. Nobody, absolutely nobody, crossed the border into another crew's domain. It was the ultimate unspoken law. And for those predators flashing black tags, Wu knew the dark reality of this system. Only the worst of the worst, the absolute monsters who wreaked total havoc, ever got dragged to the second penitentiary. He was well aware that those 4 resident sharks weren't just common thugs. They were ruthless alpha predators, hand-reared by the dragon itself. So even with Cha Gang-ryong's blood flowing through his veins, our main character could still get ripped to absolute shreds. But fear wasn't in our boy's vocabulary. He was already boots down on the staircase, marching straight up to the second level. Flashback to 2 hours ago. He'd been racking his brain analyzing the setup from every possible angle. The warden had claimed he was just there to monitor unusual phenomena. But let's be real. The head honcho wasn't running. Even the correction officers turned a blind eye, basically leaving the inmates to. With 0 boots on the ground, how on earth was the warden actually keeping tabs on this concrete jungle? The terrifying truth. Hidden eyes tracked Charlie's every single breath. Ma Wan-chong stared relentlessly at the monitors, fiercely scribbling down notes. It had been 38 hours since the fresh shark dropped into the tank. So far, not a single glitch in his routine. He was terrifyingly calm, a stark contrast to the psychotic freaks who came before him. Our hero acted almost agonizingly normal, but that perfectly crafted facade was exactly what made Wan Chang realize he was dealing with an absolute monster. Just then, Han Su-ah, the slick administrative manager of the second penitentiary, shot a glance at his coffee-stained tie. She smoothly offered to run it down to the dry cleaners. Wan Chang dismissively waved her off, telling her to get the stain out and fetch him another glass of skim milk. While his guard was down, Sua's eyes darted sharply toward the desk, locking dead onto Charlie's classified file. Meanwhile, whispers echoed through the cell blocks. The original 4 sharks caught wind of fresh blood entering the waters. They were itching to find out just how twisted this new rookie really was. Cut to a little later, over at an elite fencing club beyond the prison walls. The executive director systematically dismantled his opponent with a blinding flurry of strikes. The administrative manager, conveniently out on a supposedly routine errand, clapped enthusiastically. Now that was an absolutely flawless match. Despite posing as Wan Chang's deeply loyal assistant, she was secretly pulling strings for the celestial. Right under her boss's nose, Sua had swiped Charlie's dossier. See, the second penitentiary was a total black site, cut off from civilized society. It was essentially a breeding ground caging fierce young prodigies before the Dragon Syndicate could formally draft them into their ranks. Zhongwan had strategically planted Sua in that hellhole for one exact purpose: to scout and poach the deadliest talent available. But hitting the absolute jackpot, that was a sweet bonus. Our hero's dad was the untouchable, lifelong second-in-command of the Dragon Empire. The executive director instantly decoded the old man's shadowy game plan. He was treating his own son like a pawn to hijack the supreme throne. He finally held Cha Kangryong's ultimate weak point right in the palm of his hand. And he was dead set on violently crushing both father and son. On a normal day, the top-tier sharks wouldn't dare slaughter each other. Because even if one survived a brutal, blood-soaked brawl and devoured his rival, he'd be left gasping with lethal gashes, instantly turning him into fresh meat for the next predator in line. But by the time Charlie kicked open the doors to the broadcasting room, Tyson had already spilled the ultimate secret: the other 4 undisputed kings. All blood. A deafening screech of static violently ripped through the penitentiary's massive PA system. Our boy grabbed the mic, making damn sure every single alpha heard his war cry. Listen up, I'm Charlie, ruling the ground floor. And just for the record, I'm the flesh and blood of Cha Gang-ryong, the second in command of the Celestial Dragon. Which means I'll always crush me and you'll shoot straight to the top of the Syndicate's ranks. So come on, come hunt me down. On the surface, this giant fishbowl, known as the second prison, looked completely dead quiet. But down in the deep water, a fragile balance between the apex predators kept the deadly tension alive. Charlie fully intended to shatter that fragile piece with his bare hands. And honestly, he couldn't care less, even if it meant turning himself into fresh meat. Not even Wan Chang saw this coming. Our boy had just broadcasted a giant middle finger to every single shark in the entire penitentiary. Absolutely nothing like this had ever happened in the blood-stained history of the second prison. A manic thrill sent shivers ripping down Wan Chang's spine. He was practically vibrating with excitement, dying to see the sheer chaos this fresh meat was about to Up on the second floor, the local shark Yu Yirim actually blinked in surprise after hearing that crazy announcement. He glanced at an inmate trembling on a stool, casually asking what it felt like living right next to the son of such a terrifying mob boss. Shaking like a leaf, the terrified inmate stammered out, "Oh, it's an absolute blessing." But beneath the static of that PA system, Yu picked up on something else. Pure, unadulterated rage. The inmate collapsed onto the concrete, paralyzed by the dark look washing over Yu's face. Flashing a fake gentle smile, Yu patted the stool. "Come on now, sit back up, prop." Later that same night, Jong Boon dragged Cha Gang-ryong out to a grimy roadside food tent. Back in their wild youth, they basically lived at this spot, knocking back cheap liquor every single night. Swirling his glass, Cha chuckled dryly. "Man, back then we were just a couple of clueless street punks who just joined the syndicate." Jong Boon smirked right back. "Yeah, and who would have guessed that punk would eventually claw his way up to become the second in command of the mighty celestial dragon, forever doomed, of course, to be the eternal number 2. Taking a slow sip, he casually shifted gears. "Your kid is already in high school, right? Pretty soon, he'll be grinding through exams and college apps. Boy must be drowning in homework." Gang-ryong slammed his glass down, warning Jong-boon to cut the crap. He already knew his closely guarded secret about his boy rotting away inside the juvenile penitentiary had leaked. Jong-boon just sneered. While everyone was looking the other way, the celestial dragon morphed into a slick corporate empire. But our stubborn chairman still insists that only an absolute monster deserves the throne. You probably looked in the mirror as the eternal runner-up and thought, well, I'm screwed, so I'll just bet everything on my kid. Is that why you tossed your boy into that hellhole, secretly forging him into a weapon right behind the dragon's back? Ice dripped from Gang Ryan's voice as he stared him down. And if I did, what the hell are you gonna do about it? Jong-boon flinched, completely thrown off by that fearless attitude. Cha scoffed in disgust. A pathetic worm like you thinking you can blackmail me with a weakness? That's exactly why you'll spend the rest of your miserable life playing dress-up as a corporate executive. Stung Jong-boon instantly snapped back. Your precious brat just got shipped off to the second prison. The little prince you tried raising into a dragon is basically shark bait now. Honestly, watching your kid get ripped to shreds before you finally crash and burn sounds like prime entertainment to me. Our boy's dad didn't say a single word. He just turned his back and walked away into the dark. Watching him retreat, Jong-boon barked out a triumphant laugh. But a split second later, a deafening crash exploded right outside the tent. Jong-boon sprinted out only to find his luxury car completely caved in. Cha had totaled the engine block with one single monstrous punch. He screamed absolute murder, spitting curses at the mobster as Cha peeled away into the night. Meanwhile, deep inside the surveillance hub of the second prison, Hanswa felt an icy pit form in her stomach. Something was horribly. Yu Yedim, the absolute apex predator of the second floor, was actually slithering down to the first block just to hunt Charlie down. Back in the day, whenever Charlie heard someone let out a heavy sigh, he'd drag them along on a twisted quest to find happiness. Now this shark waltzed right onto the first floor, casually swapping polite small talk with our protagonist. Our boy wasn't having it. Cut the fake crap and get straight to the point. Still smiling, Yu claimed he despised violence, mostly because fighting just made people so terribly unhappy. He told Charlie that when his voice echoed through that PA system, it was absolutely dripping with toxic negative energy. The psycho just had to know what on earth could possibly make the son of the dragon's second in command feel so miserable. Charlie shot him a lethal glare. You dragged your ass all the way down here, just to ask me something that pathetic? But right at that moment, an overwhelming wave of dread washed over our boy. A suffocating pressure radiating off this lunatic. With zero sincerity, Yu apologized for striking a nerve. He revealed his true motive. He came down here to personally invite our guy to take the throne up on the second floor. Smiling like a demon, he whispered that Charlie was finally worthy of grasping true happiness. He'd be waiting for our hero right upstairs. Once Jay vanished into the shadows, our boy just stood there, his mind racing. He couldn't shake that nasty, skin-crawling sensation he felt the second they brushed past each other. This creep was built totally different from any thug he'd crushed before. Turning to Tyson and Yoon, he demanded to know what the deal was with that bizarre chair, the exact same chair the spy girl had whispered about. Zelda's sidekick gulped down his terror, stuttering out that it was probably the chair of happiness. Supposedly, anyone who parked themselves in that seat would break into a massive, blissful smile. But here's the kicker. It was also the single most terrifying object on the entire second floor. Total nightmare fuel. Meanwhile, the head guard was keeping a close eye on this whole freak show. Charlie blatantly rejecting every single shark in the joint was way more unhinged than he'd ever predicted. But the real shocker. The very first shark to take the bait was supposed to be the most passive guy on the block. Han was also completely clueless about why our hero was so desperate to pick. If Charlie thought he could just waltz in and conquer the second cell block, his ego was writing checks his body couldn't cash. Because inside this hellhole, a turf war between sharks was basically a guaranteed death sentence. And those poor inmates Jay had dragged off to find joy in the past. Well, they actually did find it in the end. Wan Chang was totally obsessed with this twisted success rate, always quoting Aristotle's old saying, that the ultimate purpose of life is happiness. That's why she wanted every miserable soul strapped into that wretched seat. But this so-called chair of happiness oozed a heavy, suffocating aura of pure dread. Once a broken soul sat down, the second-floor boss would starve them for days on end. No food, no water, no sleep. And right in the middle of that agonizing torture, their shattered minds would completely snap, dragging them. Every single inmate up here was absolutely petrified of that seat. But now, Charlie just casually plopped himself down on it, completely unfazed. J-Rim greeted his arrival with open, welcoming arms. The rest of the cell block beamed at our hero with these wide, creepy grins. Every last one of them looked way too thrilled. Caught right in the middle of this psychotic smiling circle, Tyson and Yoon were practically shaking out of their boots. Because the freak who invited our boy over had dragged them into the mix too. And ignoring a shark's invite, yeah, that was just begging for a body bag. The two of them were completely terrified and lost. What on earth did these maniacs have to smile about? The boss stared right through Charlie's fiery rage, spotting the deep, massive void of misery buried inside him. Wanchong was dying to know exactly who all this venom was meant for, but more than finding the target he wanted to dig up, the absolute root of that wrath. In a flash, the brutal memory of Lee's car crash ripped through Charlie's mind. Jay calmly leaned in and whispered, "Clear your mind of all that noise, because trivial baggage will only hold you back from truth." Tyson's eyes went wide. This was their golden ticket. The second-floor shark had his back completely turned. If they didn't bolt right this second, they were dead meat. Wu silently signaled Chung count to 3, then sprint for their lives. But before they even hit the number 2, our boy had already launched himself into the air, soaring right over the shark's head. He gripped the chair of happiness tight and brutally slammed it down on the guy with bone-crushing force. All of Jay's preachy garbage had completely backfired, dumping gasoline right onto Charlie's inner fire. He instantly clicked into full-blown rampage mode. See, the kid had battled severe childhood depression since he was a toddler, and the older he got, the darker the shadows became. Years ago, a doctor pitched a radical idea to the spy's parents. It was a type of therapy using hardcore psychological suggestion. The trick was to brainwash her into believing that whenever she took a seat in one specific chair, she would instantly find peace and happiness. And the younger the kid, the deeper the brainwashing sank in. Soon after, Jadim was gifted her very own chair of happiness. But right now, blazing with unstoppable, blood-boiling rage, looking at that twisted chair just made Charlie absolutely sick to his stomach, because the opponent's face was completely burned into his mind. Shrugging off the brutal hit, the guy calmly ordered the surrounding inmates to clear the room. Our MC had just smashed his precious chair of happiness into splinters. But the freak didn't even flinch. To him, the chair was just a meaningless symbol. He could easily build 100 more. Our boy never expected him to remain so chillingly calm. With an eerie calmness, he stated he wouldn't let such a trivial thing spark any negative emotions. Instead, he looked right at our boy and asked, "Do you want to try talking to the very person who ignited your rage? Maybe about the things you never got to say, or simply ran out of time to confess?" Charlie's voice dropped to a lethal growl. "Shut your mouth." Jay's eyes lit up with a sick sense of realization. That person was already dead. But it didn't matter. J-Rim always had a backup plan. To him, a smile was the ultimate symbol of joy. So he urged the MC to picture that dead loved one beaming with a bright, beautiful smile. Picture the times you two watched movies together. Think about sharing your favorite meals, just enjoying life side by side. Hold on to those blissful memories you shared. Keep replaying them, right up until her absolute final, agonizing moments on the brink of death. Right as the life was fading from her eyes, the twisted freak whispered to our MC, "How does it feel to picture her dying with a happy smile? Doesn't that just warm your heart?" The MC answered by burying his fist right into Jadim's face. But the lunatic just smiled through the blood. "Wow, looks like you're still a little tense." In a split second, J-Rim practically snapped the MC's arm like a twig. Pushing through the sheer agony, our boy channeled every ounce of power into his leg and launched a savage kick that sent the psycho flying across the room. He had made it crystal clear just a second ago for him to shut the hell up. Even the apex predator of the second floor could clearly see that Charlie was completely consumed by absolute blinding rage. Yet the maniac just dusted himself off. Mindless violence is only going to shatter your happiness. At this point, Charlie was completely sick and tired of hearing that stupid word. He locked his dead eyes onto J-Rim and snarled, "You preach about happiness day in and day out, but do you have any damn clue what true happiness actually is?" The question instantly triggered a bitter flashback. Back then, he had once asked his older sister the exact same thing. "Sis, what exactly is happiness?" His sister had been totally stumped by the question too, but after chewing on it for a good long while, she softly concluded that happiness was probably just a simple warm smile. Snapping back to reality before the twisted freak could spill another word, the MC's fist was practically buried in his eye socket. But suddenly an agonizing spike of pain violently exploded inside his skull. Our boy instantly staggered, nearly collapsing onto the concrete. Watching from the sidelines in utter shock, Tyson screamed out, "What the hell is going on?" Charlie knew exactly what was happening. The brutal recoil of his power was finally kicking in. Back in the first cell block, he had pushed his limits by forcefully maintaining his supreme fury for way too long. His body had long crossed its breaking point. Now his chaotic emotions were actively dragging his physical form down into a suffocating, muddy abyss. J-Rim, the self-proclaimed expert on joy, locked on to Charlie's suffering. Looking at the MC's twisted expression, he realized the boy in the absolute opposite direction of happiness. His face was completely masked in dark, toxic negativity. The psycho sighed, hoping Charlie would understand his twisted logic. "To carve a beautiful smile back onto your face. This is the only method I have left." But in a flash, Charlie snatched up a jagged wooden splinter from the ruined chair and launched a vicious counterattack. A deep, bloody gash instantly tore across J-Rim's face. The MC glared down at him with pure disgust. "What the hell is that look on your face? I thought smiling was your absolute favorite thing in the world. So why the hell aren't you smiling?" Right at that moment, Hansu stepped out of the shadows to spectate the brutal bloodbath. He instantly realized that Charlie was agonizing through the severe backlash caused by overusing his supreme fury. The kid had blindly charged in without even weighing the massive risks, yet he still had the nerve to challenge an apex predator. Hansu shook his head, judging that the great Gangren's son was at the end of the day nothing more than a reckless, impulsive little brat. J-Rim slowly traced the fresh bleeding gash on his cheek. He whispered with a chilling calmness, "I truly despise fighting, but to achieve my ultimate goal, you leave me absolutely no choice." In his twisted mind, J-Rim firmly believed that the Celestial Dragon Syndicate was actively destroying world happiness. Crime was running rampant everywhere, leaving a trail of miserable, broken people in its wake. He desperately wanted to force happiness upon them all, which was the exact psychotic reason he infiltrated the dragon in the first place. Meanwhile, our protagonist was rapidly losing his edge, aggressively dragged down by the crippling withdrawal of his supreme fury. He knew damn well that J-Rim's noble intentions were total garbage at his core. The guy was nothing but a ruthless criminal. But this lunatic morbidly believed that pure joy totally blurred the lines between right and wrong. Violently backed into a corner, just for a fleeting moment, he froze dead in his tracks. Through the shark's eyes, the whole world boiled down to just two extremes, pure joy or absolute misery. But a split second later, our shadow-like hero vanished into thin air, gripping a jagged wooden stake. He materialized right behind the guy, his voice ice cold. "Did you seriously land yourself in juvie just to test out that twisted little happiness theory of yours?" Back in his school days, J-Rim was a total outcast. His classmates couldn't stand being around his intensely dark, gloomy vibe. It genuinely baffled him. Were miserable kids just not allowed to have friends? That's when his older sister gently told him, "If you just force a smile and fake being a little more upbeat, the people around you will start feeling happy too. Then naturally you'll catch that happiness right back. It's just like a cold. It spreads." So to him, juvie wasn't a punishment. It was, actually, the absolute perfect paradise crawling with deeply miserable souls. He planned to use the inmates as human guinea pigs to dig deep and unlock the ultimate secret to human joy. Cha never imagined J-Rim had clawed his way up to the rank of shark in Cell Block 2 over something so completely ridiculous. He had been scouted as a top-tier prodigy bursting with explosive potential. The kind of monster who could eventually dominate the Heavenly Dragon Syndicate. What blew Cha's mind even more was that he still hadn't unleashed that hidden power. But honestly, Cha couldn't care less about whatever sick psychological experiments Jerem was running on these inmates. He already figured out the guy had a completely different endgame. The two brawlers kept trading savage blows. Battered and bleeding, our hero was losing ground fast. Jerem wound up for a brutal finishing strike, but his foot slid straight onto the shattered ruins of a wooden chair. This was a trap. Our guy had masterfully baited him right into that exact spot. The hero saw right through his little act. The second-floor shark, spreading joy to everyone around him. It had absolutely nothing to do with selfless love, nor some noble spirit of sacrifice. It was purely, entirely selfish. The dark truth was Jerem's older sister suffered from clinical depression, way more crippling than his own. She just masked it perfectly whenever her little brother was around. But the darkness finally consumed her, spiraling completely out of control. He actually took her advice. He flashed fake smiles at people and finally made friends. Yet his sister just muttered to herself, completely checked out from reality. Happiness is like a cold. It spreads. So if Jerem is happy, then I'll get to be happy too, right? Cha completely rejected that girl's garbage logic. To him, she was nothing more than a selfish hypocrite. Surprisingly, the shark actually agreed with Cha's harsh call. Lifting our hero off the ground with a single hand, the beast whispered, "My hunt for joy was never about saving anyone else. Cursed with this chronic, rotting depression, I haven't felt a single ounce of happiness my entire life. My heart is a bottomless pit of misery." Pushed over the edge by his own absolute despair, the second-floor shark finally triggered his supreme wrath. Watching the bloody showdown on the security monitors, Ma Wangchang knew the science behind this crazy power-up was actually pretty simple. Supreme wrath forces the body to completely shatter its natural limits. It's basically a massive overdrive of the nervous, endocrine, and muscular systems. When a person's emotions are pushed to the absolute breaking point, the sympathetic nervous system automatically fires up a hardcore fight-or-flight response. Heavy-duty stress hormones like adrenaline, noradrenaline flood the bloodstream in an instant. The heart rate skyrockets. Oxygen floods the brain. Muscles bulk up with raw power, and reflexes hit lightning speed. Meanwhile, that adrenaline spikes muscle contractions, completely turning off the brain's natural safety limiters, and pumps out insane levels of endorphins. It turns a regular person into a painless, unstoppable juggernaut. Fast twitch muscle fibers that usually cap out at around 40 to 60% efficiency are forced to fire at 100% under these brutal conditions. When normal humans suddenly display superhuman strength, in life or death situations, it's just their biological limiters snapping off. It's pure, undeniable science. But Ma also knew that triggering supreme wrath was incredibly rare, usually just a freak accident of nature. So anyone twisted enough to awaken it on command and weaponize it instantly meets the first requirement. To claw his way up as a second-floor apex, he was the living, breathing embodiment of pure misery. John Chang painted her as a Greenland shark, lurking in the freezing, pitch-black abyss of the deep ocean, drifting with dead, hollow eyes. Slow, silent. Most of the time, she completely ignores the prey swimming by. But the second she locks onto a target, a terrifying switch flips. She erupts into a violent frenzy, butchering everything in her path. Even the experts crown the Greenland shark as the undisputed apex predator of the North Atlantic food chain. Ye was convinced that our boy playing second fiddle to the celestial dragon's heir could never grasp the sheer horror of a truly cursed life. Deep down, the spy girl craved just one taste of genuine happiness, more than anyone. Burned out by the nasty side effects, Charlie couldn't trigger his combat state. Once again, he was backed into a corner, desperately scrambling for a way to survive. Tapping into that dark headspace, his raw power skyrocketed, fueled entirely by his endless agony. That was the day it finally clicked. He figured out exactly why suffering exists. And the twisted secret. The assignment for the day was simple. Sketch the absolute happiest thing in the world for the spy. It was a puzzle with no missing pieces. Out of nowhere, his mind drifted to his sister, trying to picture what a real, unfiltered smile from her even looked like. Not long after, Jerem sprinted home, eager to flash his masterpiece to his sister, just to catch a glimpse of that elusive grin. Instead, he grabbed hands that felt like absolute ice. A sea of scattered pills blanketed the floor around her. That image burned itself into his retinas permanently. His sister slumped in the chair of bliss, her flesh slowly turning numb and rigid. The very girl who lived in a deeper hell than the Greenland beast, the one who starved for joy more than a dying soul, actually painted a beautiful, haunting smile across her face the second she slipped away from this world. To the inked kid, that exact snapshot became the ultimate definition of pure. From that gruesome turning point on, he unlocked a totally different path to paradise. Just like you need pitch black to appreciate the blinding dawn, and brutal bloodshed to make humanity beg for harmony, it is only through crushing despair that mortals ever truly grasp what bliss is. The protagonist narrowed his eyes, clearly disgusted. What is with the sudden philosophical bullshit? He stepped in and launched a devastating straight right at his face. Snatching the fist out of the air like it was nothing, the predator kept talking. My sister was drowning in sorrow, so she achieved the ultimate state of euphoria. I am exactly the same. So if any poor bastard dares to block my path, I have no choice but to butcher them. Taking the brunt of the assault without flinching, Charlie spit back. I do not give a damn about your twisted joy. The only thing I am feeling right now is absolutely sick to my stomach from your pathetic rambling. Our guy surged raw power into his knuckles, gearing up for a knockout blow, but the psycho countered by locking him down. Yai, fueled by sheer psychotic rage, was freakishly strong. He wanted our hero to drown in that toxic sludge of despair, the exact opposite of inner peace. As the edges of Charlie's vision, his mind plummeted into a void of suffocating nothingness. Paralysis took over. No feeling, no sound, just his lingering thoughts dissolving into a thick fog. Charlie mentally whispered, "Is this it? Am I just going to let myself sink away?" Right then, a shocking surge of warmth sparked in his chest. Lee Da-young manifested in the deepest, darkest corner of his dying mind. Up above, Chang analyzed the brutal beatdown through the security feed. Visually, a total bloodbath. Scientifically, absolutely useless data. He was banking on a jaw-dropping spectacle, something that would completely shatter the current power scaling. But the kid's sloppy performance left a bitter taste in his mouth. Chang genuinely started questioning if this punk even deserved the shark title. Back inside his mental abyss, our hero locked eyes with Ali, looking exactly like a childhood friend finally crossing paths after years apart. Her voice was soft, asking if he had been holding up okay lately. A sharp sting burned behind his nose, but he swallowed the grief, flashing a broken smile. I am surviving. But in a flash, Da-young's gentle face twisted into pure malice, her voice dripping with ice as she hissed. What gives you the right to be okay? I am rotting 6 feet under, shivering alone, drowning in the pitch black. So tell me, why the hell do you get to breathe so easily? I am dead meat, and it is all because of a worthless piece of trash like you. Her phantom body violently contorted, bones snapping and flesh melting, until the nightmarish visage of Shagan Grion towered over him. The monster growled. I slaughtered that little brat, and I did it all as a massive favor to you. The protagonist burned with the urge to slaughter him right then and there, but our boy's battered body suddenly gave out and collapsed. Shagan Grion echoed the exact same chilling words he had spit out back in the day. If you want to murder your own father, then go claim the throne of this juvenile penitentiary. Right. As Ma Wan-cheng was clocking out for the day, a sudden voice stopped him dead in his tracks. He couldn't believe his eyes. Our lead had actually clawed his way back to his feet. Jerry was completely clueless about Charlie's endgame. Logically speaking, the massive toll of the overheat, stacked with his brutal injuries, should have already drained every last drop of the protagonist's stamina. Locking eyes with him, the apex predator couldn't help but ask, "What the hell is keeping you on your feet?" He locked our hero in a vicious grip once again, but to his absolute shock, the kid who should be dropping dead actually stood his ground. In the very next split second, the tattooed punk caught a devastating hook straight to the jaw. Charlie still had a mission to finish, so there was absolutely no way he was going down here. He tapped into a state of absolute unhinged rage, fueled by pure fury, the apex predator of the second floor. Didn't even have a fraction of a second to react before a savage blow slammed straight into his ribs. The horrifying impact twisted his entire body mid-air, sending him violently flying backward. Han-chan had never encountered a phenomenon like this in any scientific journal or classified file. A predator, whose body had been ripped apart and left bleeding at death's door, was suddenly back on the hunt. It practically shattered every single law of nature. Ma started trembling with anticipation, dying to see exactly how far Charlie could push his limits. Jay wasn't about to bite the dust here either, until he managed to grasp true happiness. He refused to stop moving forward. He plunged back into his ultimate state of absolute misery. But the kid who had resurrected from the brink was terrifyingly overpowered, boasting ungodly speed and raw strength. Rin got completely, utterly crushed, stomped face first into the concrete, but the apex predator refused to let it end. Just like that. He was obsessed with dragging our boy down into the absolute deepest pits of despair. But in that very fraction of a second, the tattooed brute was suddenly slammed by an extreme, bone-chilling wave of emotional pressure. The suffocating weight almost choked the life out of him, yet he still refused to throw in the towel. He violently shoved the protagonist's foot off his body, but Charlie instantly hijacked that momentum to wind up a devastating strike. He was absolutely done wasting time. Then, an earth-shattering boom echoed violently throughout the entire penitentiary. Jay swore he would drag the dragon's son into the darkest pits of misery. But truthfully, there was absolutely no need for that, because Charlie had already been standing right on the edge of that abyss for a very, very long time. Isaac had been itching for a life-or-death bloodbath between apex predators for ages. But the horrific aftermath of this brawl looked like an entire war had been waged. The inmate was trembling so hard that he was desperately plotting a prison break. He knew that as long as Boss Charlie was breathing down their necks, brutal gang wars were guaranteed, and sooner or later he'd end up as collateral damage. Han knew from the very beginning that bloodlines never lie. The protagonist was infinitely more lethal than she had ever calculated. Every single inmate down on the first floor was whispering about the legendary showdown. The butchering of a top-tier predator was a game-changing milestone, signaling that the long-standing peace had just been violently shattered into pieces. A brand new hierarchy was about to crash down on them, completely drenched in blood. Bottom feeders like them could only survive by laying low and hiding. This massive shift in the prison's power dynamic sent shivers of sheer ecstasy down Ma Wanchang's spine. As a scholar, he was itching to classify Charlie. But even after frantically flipping through every single shark species in his massive encyclopedia, he still came up empty. Not a single one matched our boy's vicious nature. Ever since he earned his doctorate degree, this was the very first time his curiosity had spiked this intensely. He was practically losing his damn mind. The once stagnant aquarium was now churning with violent tidal waves, and a fresh current demanded fresh blood to balance the ecosystem. The more test subjects swimming around, the higher the chances of Ma witnessing glorious, chaotic phenomenons. He started to seriously ponder whether he should unleash a few new monsters into the second penitentiary block. Over in cell block 1 of the juvenile center, Mac Gunn was grinding away without a single break. Stacks of combat manuals heavily littered the floor around him. A juvenile slammer was already 10 times deadlier than the streets outside. Gunn fully realized that absolutely no one was coming to his rescue. He refused to repeat his pathetic past mistakes or walk down that doomed path ever again. The inmate had firmly made up his mind. He had to forge himself into an absolute weapon. He had to become brutally strong if he ever wanted to make it out of this juvie alive. But forging real strength doesn't happen overnight. Every time the guy drilled his moves, he crashed and burned. Gu Namin urged him to rethink his whole strategy. A fragile punk like you would shatter from a single tap. Yet, you actually think a few kicks will flip your destiny. Stop wasting your stamina and just come chill with me. Ever since Charlie vanished from the spotlight, Gunamin had stepped up as the top dog of Cell 36. He couldn't wrap his head around why John was pushing himself to the absolute limit, especially since our guy had utterly wrecked every single cell boss, packing them off to the ER and throwing the whole penitentiary into a bizarrely peaceful era. Even so, Namin was quietly itching to figure out exactly where Charlie had vanished to. The inmate had a creeping suspicion that our hero was hiding secrets that stretched way beyond these concrete walls. Right as that thought crossed his mind, the sudden, shrill bleating of goats echoed from the yard. Turns out the warden was actually raising a whole flock of black goats, and rumors were already flying that they were destined for a massive stew. At that exact moment, the white-haired kid was dying of sheer boredom. Ever since Charlie completely steamrolled the prison during that chaotic boss summit, his only real source of entertainment had totally evaporated. The white-haired kid was desperate to hunt down a thrill that would make his blood pump. Right then, he spotted a bizarre spectacle unfolding just a few yards away. His lips curled upward into a chilling, wicked smirk. Meanwhile, our main guy was sprawled out in the medical bay over in Ward 2. Snapping awake, the brutal memories of his recent brawl flooded his mind. He quickly realized that the vicious backlash of his ultimate rage state was something he absolutely could not shrug off. Luckily, his wild emotions had mostly cooled down by now. Just then, Sua strutted into the infirmary. She ordered Charlie to lay back and behave himself because a very special happy hour was about to kick off.